interesting right now. And Nora Melinda joins us, Bloomberg Equities reporter. So Walgreens, this was kind of like a throw out with the bucket of the trash on Friday announcement, but quite interesting.
Very interesting. So we're seeing Walgreens shares down as much as 14% this morning. That's making them the worst performing stock in the S&P 500 this morning by a percentage basis. Now, this is the biggest drop that is seen since last June, and this is after they are facing a lawsuit from the U.S. Justice Department. They're suing the company for allegedly dispensing millions of unlawful prescriptions while ignoring red flags. Now, they're saying that the prescriptions, they were seeking reimbursements under the federal health care programs, despite receiving pressure from corporate leadership to dispense drugs quickly. They are saying that they are going to be fighting back against this lawsuit against the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, but we have yet to see how, of course, that will turn out. But of course, investors are a little bit nervous hearing this news, especially when you think about the fact that the stock was down 64% at the end of last year.
Oof.
Yeah, and a big part of that's also going to be, can some of these companies keep their PBMs, their pharmacy benefit managers, and their business too? Like, just that whole sector is going to have some clouds over them.
Definitely.
Okay, also looking at Goldman. What's going on here?
Yeah, so Goldman, I know you all will be talking about this a little bit later in the show, but we are seeing shares of Goldman down as much as 2.7%. They are paring those losses down about 0.9% as we speak. But this is after Goldman is promoting a slate of executives to run some of its biggest Wall Street business lines. So we're seeing promotions of new leaders to run equities, fixed income, and banking units. But of course, with any sort of reshuffling, you're going to face some uncertainty when you think about investors and what promotions could look like. So we are seeing shares down a tad bit, but this is some really interesting news that I'm excited to see how it will transpire.
Also, this after last week and that like stellar earnings report for the banks and sort of the movement there. So it's sort of like we had that big rally, take a little off the table.
Bit of a
at
breather.
the end of the day. All right, Nora, thanks a lot. Really appreciate it. Nora Melinda, Bloomberg Equities reporter, joining us. Now, obviously, the question is, how do you factor in any Trump policies, right? Was it JP Morgan that said they're going to have like a tariff trade desk now, working like 24 hours a day?
Exactly. Trying to stay on top of it.
Right, just trying to like understand what the input means for their models. So we wanted to get more on that with Brendan Murray, Bloomberg Global Trade Editor, on all these tariffs. Let's just start with what we know in terms of Mexico and Canada and what we could expect come February 1st.
Yeah, so Trump, in an Oval Office press briefing late yesterday, said that he was going to put a 25% tariff on Mexico and Canada starting February 1st. So, you know, less than 2 weeks from now, 30% of all U.S. Trade imports would be a quarter more expensive. Now, whether those are threats that are aimed at driving those two countries to the negotiating table or a promise that he'll actually follow through on, is we don't know. But he has the authority to do so, and the currency markets at least are taking him at his word.
Brendan, would these be enacted via an executive order? Is it simply signing a pen and they're put in place?
Yeah, there's some legal mumbo jumbo that he would have to go through and declare, quote unquote, a national emergency, and you know, that could be the fentanyl problem, or the illegal migration problem from both countries. Although Canada, it's a lot less acute from the northern border. There is executive authority that the president has to put tariffs at least temporarily on countries that are causing, a big trade imbalance or some kind of economic emergency.
Right, that's what's really confusing, because if we look at tariff policy as a negotiating tool, and you could look at what wasn't said about China as a window into that, what is the U.S. trying to negotiate with Canada?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. Trump basically looks at bilateral trade relationships and says, if you have a surplus for us, we're losing, and we're going to fix those. So he would want, Canada to buy more U.S. products or subsidize less of its own products at the expense of American producers. So it would be to drive concessions. The USMCA, this is the successor to the NAFTA agreement that was renegotiated in Trump's first term, is up for review in about a year and a half. So perhaps this is a tactic to kind of put the U.S. on the front foot in those talks that will undoubtedly start this year.
it's only been a very short time for this administration, but we've not heard much as it relates to China and tariffs. Where do you think the policy winds are blowing there?
Yeah, so lost in all of the Mexico-Canada headlines yesterday was the actual executive action that the president put out on trade policy, and there were a number of things in that that he asked his department heads, his cabinet secretaries to investigate or assess, and one of those is oversized trade imbalances, currency misalignments, and those kinds of things that the code word that's just code for China there. So those will go through a more, a longer department-led review. The deadline is April 1st, so that's not too far out. That's just a couple months, and and those could be the legal justifications for a tougher tariff stance with China.
What's so interesting is when we're starting to get company calls, or even in the fourth quarter, we were getting third quarter earnings out, CEOs talking about tariffs. They all seem to say, like, we can handle it. We're monitoring it very closely. We've already diversified maybe our supply base after the last Trump administration. Do you feel like companies are prepared this time around? Because I'm trying to see where the equity impact is going to be.
Yeah, they would be, and I agree with you. The lots of those, I read through those transcripts myself and try to see where the winds are blowing in the C-suites. But they would be more diversified in their supplier or supply chains. A lot of companies started doing that well before Trump. To move outside China, the sort of so-called China plus one or plus two strategies. So there would be a bit of a shock absorber built in since the first Trump administration, but still there's no getting around the fact that if a universal tax that Trump has floated even yesterday on all U.S. imports would start chipping away at earnings outlooks quarter by quarter as we go through the year.
Brendan, if we heard anything from Mexico and or Canada about what they will do if in fact these 25% tariffs do start on, February 1st, maybe?
Well, Canada has said, we'll retaliate in kind, and if you come at us with a 25% tariffs, then we have a list of U.S. products that will do the same thing to. Mexico has, I'm not sure Mexico has threatened in kind retaliation, but Mexico has said, look, you're just going to hurt yourself because a lot of the imports, a lot of American companies are in Mexico, and if you start putting tariffs on those companies products, then you're just going to hurt the business back in the U.S.
Right. All right. We'll have to see how that plays out. We'll follow it closely, of course. Brendan Murray, global trade editor. He's going to be busy going forward. That's for sure. Global trade editor for Bloomberg News. He's based in London. Again, the headline on the Bloomberg terminal: Trump tariffs are whiplash warning for corporate America. As Alex was suggesting, a lot of companies talking about it and trying to position for a world in which tariffs become much more of an issue. Coming up, Todd Gillespie, Bloomberg finance reporter. He's going to give us the latest reporting on Goldman Sachs. They picked new leaders to run Wall Street's equities business, fixed income business, banking business. So that's coming up. Plus, Christopher Smart, managing partner at Abroth Group. Get his thoughts on day one of the new Trump administration. Looking at the markets here, mixed here. S&P up 21 points. The NASDAQ down 26 points. The Dow up 80 points. We'll have more coming up. This is Bloomberg Good Morning.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker, the Bloomberg Newsroom, with this Bloomberg Business Flash. The major stock averages, they are higher right now, higher at a little change. You have 8 of the 11 major industry groups in the S&P 500 are up, led by utilities and real estate. Right now, the worst performing group belongs to information technology, and that's home to Apple. Apple receiving a fresh pair of analyst downgrades. Latest sign that soft iPhone sales becoming an increasing concern for investors in the company. Charles Schwab, the best performing individual stock in the S&P 500, it reported results that exceeded estimates. They continue to attract record new inflows right into their retail brokerage. 3M out with earnings today, expecting profit to grow this year. The CEO there, William Brown, working to advance his plan to turn around this sprawling manufacturer. Shares of 3M right now up 4.5%. And D.R. Horton, the home builder, reporting earnings per share for the first quarter that beat the average analyst estimate. D.R. Horton shares right now up just fractionally. Overall, the S&P 500 20 points higher, up 0.4%. The Dow Jones Industrial Average up 246 points, and the NASDAQ 115 points higher. We check the markets for you all day long, right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Alex.
All right. Thanks so much, John Tucker. Alex Steele here alongside Paul Sweeney. This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. We cover everything from politics, finance, business, economics through our lens of our Bloomberg Intelligence folks. They cover 2,000 companies and 130 industries all around the world. We also tap our great deep bench of Bloomberg reporters all around the world. And let's hit on one of them right now. Todd Gillespie is Bloomberg finance reporter, and he helped break the story that Goldman Sachs is picking some star leaders to run its Wall Street engine in a pretty big revamp. Todd, can you break us through what the revamp actually is? Like you say, ooh, all stars, and then I don't know the names, and then I don't know what I'm looking at.
Totally, Alex. Yeah, and I mean, to most people, they won't necessarily know the names outside of the finance industry either, but these are big people, rising stars, up-and-comers, many of whom have held senior posts at Goldman Sachs for a long time already. But the idea of this is creating a new layer of management, basically, and promoting a lot more people. 15 new names are going to be sitting on Goldman Sachs's management committee. That's up from 24. So in total, we're talking about a 39-person management committee, which is quite an expansion here. And now equities will have 3 of its own heads, fixed income business will have 3 of its own heads, and the banking business at Goldman Sachs will also have 3 heads as well. And those people will report into heads of each of the overarching umbrellas at Goldman Sachs, who then obviously report into the C-suite there. So, you know, it's quite a big shift.
I don't like it. It just layers on another layer of management. Where is the value added here? Is this? I read this story, which is a great story, by the way, and I feel like they're just rewarding people with titles.
Yeah, Paul. I mean, that is certainly one of the concerns. But right here, you've got to look at the context of the industry, right? What is Goldman trying to do by doing this? They're trying to wrest off, competition from the alternative asset management industry. They're, who's already been trying to poach top executives from Goldman Sachs. We've had John Waldron just last week handed an $80 million retention bonus to stay on for another 5 years, alongside David Solomon, who's looking very comfortable in his seat as CEO. So, the bank is trying to fend off this kind of competition from across the street. We all know right now that banks are not in as lucrative shape right now as private equity firms like Carlyle, like Apollo, for instance, who have been, reported to have approached people like Waldron already. So the bank is trying to, this is a defensive move as much as a promotional move for the people inside.
Does it work? Like, does it satiate people enough when they're promoted and stuff? Like, is it?
Well,
I mean,
Alex, we'll have to find out.
80 million in Waldron's a different story, but
Sure,
like this
sure.
class coming up.
Yeah, I mean, this has been in the works for a long time. I mean, this is a result of a year-long or so set of discussions, right? Okay. Where people know, that there's a restless, very talented, up-and-coming group of executives who want to be recognized. They want to see a path forward, and they hope, obviously the bank hopes by doing this, they're going to give them that path forward. It certainly doesn't end the internal politics. If anything, it also creates, the potential for new tensions and, and new fiefdoms, but we'll see later down the road how this plays out.
What's interesting, for positive for Goldman Sachs is, I think early in his tenure as CEO, Mr. Solomon, some shaky ground, some missteps, and people were, even suggesting maybe he's not the right person for the job. But boy, he turned that narrative around, and he seems from the outside very secure in his position.
Certainly, Paul. Yeah, I mean, the past 2 years have been a real turnaround for him. I mean, there was a lot of criticism of him early on for, missteps in the, the retail adventure that Goldman Sachs was going on with Marcus, with, with this, JV with Apple. It now has this cards business that it's trying to sell off now. There's a lot of, speculation about what's going to happen to that now, who's going to pick up that portfolio. But certainly, David Solomon, thanks to a bumper crop of earnings results that have come out the past year or so, the bank is looking on much steadier ground, and he's kind of consolidated his grip, you could say, perhaps, over this bank. And he's aware, but he's also he's aware that him being in the seat for longer will make other people unsettled, and the board is aware of that as well, and that's partly the reason for the John Waldron $80 million retention bonus that we saw last week, and it could explain some of the moves that we're seeing today as well.
Yeah, such a good point. Thank you so much, Todd. Really appreciate it. Todd Gillespie, Bloomberg finance reporter, joining us on Goldman Sachs, picking some leaders to run all of its Wall Street engines like fixed income, equities, trading, etc. All right, now I want to go to the broader look on the market, right? I'm getting all the notes of like Trump day one, how to position, what does it mean, the whiplash we've seen in the market. So how do you position if you're actually putting together an equity portfolio or an investment portfolio? Christopher Smart is managing partner at Aberoth Group. He is joining us now. I guess the question really becomes, Chris, how do you model things we don't know but think are coming?
Well, good to be with you, Alex. I think the answer is very carefully and very slowly. And, we're not quite 24 hours into this new administration. We've had a slew of decisions and executive orders and comments by the new president. But I think many of us still scratching our heads as to what this might mean for any given portfolio. You have a series of macro decisions that are looming, whether that's around the budget or taxes or Fed policy that we're still not clear about in terms of the president giving any signals about what he has in store for what his preferences are for the upcoming budget. We have a lot of announcements on tax and tariff policy, which sort of takes you down to the corporate level. A lot of CFOs, as you were talking about earlier on your program, trying to figure out what this means for them. And then, oh, by the way, this is earnings week. So there's just a whole lot for investors to digest. And as I talk to my clients, I know they're working very hard and feeling that flashback to 4, 5, 6, 7 years ago in the first Trump administration, where if you haven't checked your news feed in the last couple of hours, you feel like you may be out of date.
So, Christopher, what do you think is some of the most important things for President Biden and his administration to achieve in the first 100 days?
I think you meant President Trump.
Trump, yes, excuse me.
I think we're all going to get used to that.
Yep.
I think it's really the thing that investors, I think, are going to want to really get clarity on is the tariffs issue. And I think we have maybe less clarity on it today than we did a couple of days ago. To my mind, the tariffs that are linked to non-economic issues, whether it's fentanyl or it's immigration, Canada and Mexico, whether it's tariffs that were promised to China, related to the ByteDance TikTok divestiture, those feel a lot like negotiating moves to kind of apply leverage to a non-economic issue that will get resolved before big tariffs are applied. I think the real thing that investors need to keep their eyes on are these studies that he's now commissioned from the Department of Commerce and others to look at currency manipulation, to look at market protection, to look at all of these other things. That is likely to bring on the wave of tariffs. Again, maybe not at the 60 or 100% level that were talked about during the campaign, but really focused on countries where there is a trade imbalance, a bilateral deficit that the president is clearly focused on, even though most economists are not so much, and that those are the ones that I think we're going to have to watch over time.
I should point out that Scott Bessent has won a Senate Finance Committee backing for Treasury Secretary job. We'll, of course, keep you updated on any one of those headlines as they continue to come across. Chris, staying on that, clearly what happens to Treasury and issuance will have very dramatic effects on the Treasury curve, particularly also when we factor in the debt ceiling. What are you telling your clients about that?
Well, we of course got no word on any of that from the new president in the last 24 hours in terms of what he may have in mind for debts, deficits, and debt limits. I think again this is going to be something that causes a lot of near-term anxiety, but ultimately at the 11th, 12th, or maybe 13th hour gets resolved in terms of both the debt limit and keeping the government funded. I think we're all expecting there to be some kinds of tax cuts, probably not much to close the deficit, just because no matter what the president wants, there's just a whole lot of people in Congress who have an interest in some sort of spending program, and those are very hard to close. It's very narrow majority that Speaker Johnson has there. So I think not a lot of change there in the budget trajectory.
Chris, what do you think the president's policy will likely be as it relates to illegal immigrants, maybe returning some people back to their country of origin? How do you think that might play out? Because that was certainly, if not the biggest, one of the biggest topics in the campaigns.
I think it was, and I think we'll see some very high-profile moves on that front. You're already seeing some of it in terms of the executive orders, the emergency declared on the border, the return to Mexico policy being put back into place. I wonder, though, how much tolerance voters and Americans will have for a lot of disruption to law-abiding immigrants in this country, whether they are documented or undocumented, how much disruption they will tolerate. There are estimates of about 8 to 10 million undocumented Americans, some even higher estimates than that. It's really hard to see, that number of people being removed from the country physically. So I think you're going to see a lot of drama around it and in the next few months, but maybe not so much to move at least the economic needle in terms of the labor force.
Is there any sector, Chris, before I let you go, that feels really, really, really not in a good place? And I'm just kind of setting you up to say offshore wind, but it doesn't have to be that. It can pretty much be anything.
Well, you can start with offshore wind. You can start with anything that's related to renewables. You can go on to sort of, anything that relies heavily on a single source of imports from China. And then, a lot of costs are going to go up, whether you either have a customer living across a border or a supplier living across the border. It's going to be more and more difficult to operate in an international footprint than it was before. So there are some key pain points initially, as you point out, but I think more broadly speaking, these costs are going to rise.
Chris, thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. Christopher Smart, he's a managing partner at R. Roth Group, former special assistant to the president for international economics, giving us the latest on some of these very, very early hours of the Trump administration here, day 2 of his administration, staying on top of some of the discussions around tariffs and other economic policies that may emanate from this new administration. S&P 500 up 24 points. The Nasdaq's up 13 points fractionally. Yields come in. We got the 10-year Treasury yielding 4.56%. This is Bloomberg. Good morning.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. Treasury yields easing in the bond market, giving back some of the big gains made in recent months that cranked up the pressure on stocks. Now, let's start there. The 2-year down to basis point 427 right now. The 10-year yield 7 basis points lower, and that is at 455. You have the S&P 500 27 points higher right now, about 0.5%, 6,023 in the index. The Dow Jones Industrial Average up 315 points. That's a rise of about 0.75%. NASDAQ 100, 36 points higher. Yeah, that is up 0.2%. 3M helping leading the market higher. It is climbing right now about 3.8%. They reported profit and revenue for the end of the year that edged past analyst expectations. The company behind Scotch Tape delivering forecasts for financial results that were roughly in line with analyst expectations. Charles Schwab, those shares this morning, they are up about 4.1%. delivering a better profit report for the end of the year than analysts expected. They credit clients pouring more dollars in as the total client assets rose 19% from a year earlier. They help offset an 11.5% drop for Walgreens Boots Alliance. The Justice Department accused Walgreens late Friday of filling millions of prescriptions without a legitimate purpose. Right now, again, those shares are lower, down 12%, in fact. And we check the markets for you all day long, right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Alex.
Alrighty, thanks so much, John Tucker. Alex Steele here alongside Paul Sweeney. This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. We are broadcasting to you live from our interactive broker studio right here in the very cold Midtown Manhattan. I did see someone running this morning in 14 degrees, which was a whole bunch of crazy. I don't know how you do that, but apparently that's something that we do.
It's freezing in the studio.
Yeah, in the studio it's cold. Anyway, we were just talking about how to understand President Trump's policies when it comes to the markets. Now let's kind of pick apart what are those most important policies, what's the noise, what's the reality. Joining us now is Jennifer Lawless, professor at University of Virginia. We've had less than 24 hours to dissect President Trump's second term. There was so much coming out. What stood out the most to you?
Well, yesterday really was a whirlwind. What was typical was that when a new president comes in, he typically issues executive orders undoing a lot of what the previous administration did. So those kinds of things are pretty standard. What struck me yesterday was this speed with which Donald Trump is willing to follow through on some campaign promises that didn't matter that much to most people. So, for example, he used both his inauguration address and the power of the pen to say that moving forward, the federal government only recognizes 2 genders. He moved forward saying that the federal government is going to require a hiring freeze for all open positions and that people working for the federal government have to return to work. These are not the reasons that people elected Donald Trump, but they're the quick things that he can do on day one.
Jennifer, can you talk to us about presidential pardons? It seems like the last days of the Biden administration and now the first day of the Trump administration, these presidents have just gone to extraordinary lengths in terms of the number of pardons and the severity and the types of pardons. Has this always been a part of the American presidency? What's happening?
It has not. There have always been examples of pardons being issued. Sometimes it's to political friends. Sometimes it's to people who were serving sentences that are no longer mainstream kinds of sentences because policy has evolved over time. What we've seen here from both the Biden and the Trump teams in terms of these pardons are really a response to Donald Trump. Over the course of the last 4 years, he's made it clear that he thinks he's been politically persecuted and that as a result, one of the first things he's going to do as president is seek retribution. And we saw him yesterday continue to talk about that. We saw him pardon most of the January 6th insurrectionists. The Biden pardons are related to all of this too, though, because by pardoning members of his family and the January 6th committee, for example, what Biden was trying to do was inoculate those people from Trump's retribution. So it's unusual, but Biden and Trump's behavior is related to each other.
There was also some narratives that came out of the last 24 hours from analysts saying that it's hard to know which Trump we are going to see. Like, are we going to see the Trump that spoke amongst his peers right after he was inaugurated, that seemed a much more measured approach to policy and a much more politically savvy individual? Or do you see the one that was talking to his supporters later that night that seemed much more kind of out for blood and retribution? And we got executive orders and pardons relating to both. How does that evolve, you think, over the next coming weeks?
I think we're going to see both Donald Trumps. We know that he's happiest when he's talking to his supporters, when he's in campaign mode, and when he's generating and ginning up that kind of populist sentiment that got him elected. But he's also aware of the fact that in order to pass any of his legislative initiatives, he needs Congress on board. So I think he'll try to thread that needle. But when push comes to shove, we've now had 9 solid years of evidence that he ultimately prefers the campaign trail style.
Jennifer, what do you think in terms of some of these nominations to cabinet positions? Which ones do you think will be problematic?
Well, let me first say that I think the Marco Rubio nomination getting through so quickly with unanimous Senate approval was a smart move on the part of the Democrats, so that when they do vote against other nominees, I think problematic will be people like Pete Hegseth, like Tulsi Gabbard, like Robert F. Kennedy Jr., that the Republicans won't be in a position where they can simply say that the Democrats are obstructing everybody. But, you know, Donald Trump knew that he was putting forward controversial names. He was doing it as a signal both to his base and to Republicans in Congress that he is going to usher in a new kind of government. But I don't think what he realized is that senators do take quite seriously the nomination process, the confirmation process, and the experience of a lot of these people. So, you know, I think a lot of them will get through, especially the lower profile ones. But Gabbard, Hegseth, and Kennedy, my bet is will face some tough times ahead.
Talk to us about staffing currently in the White House. His White House chief of staff really, in part, I mean, drove through that election, that re-election campaign. What do we expect there?
I think we'll see what we have generally seen with chiefs of staff early on, and then it'll just be a question of how long she can last. You know, we've seen this movie before, and people want to sort of protect Donald Trump from people that might otherwise want to get into the Oval Office and influence him, who might want to move him away from what the administration's agenda is, who might want to move him away from sort of the normal way of dealing with Congress. She has her work cut out for her, and at some point, Donald Trump will probably get frustrated and replace her.
Jennifer, how about Ukraine? That seems to be, from an international perspective, one of the key areas for President Trump to act. What do you expect?
Well, based on what President Zelensky has said, you know, he's hopeful that the United States will continue to provide funding and will continue to, you know, allow Ukraine to exist. But based on Donald Trump's relationship with Putin and his general view of, you know, world powers right now, and mentioning things like invading Greenland and taking back the Panama Canal, if I were the Ukraine or a supporter of people in Ukraine, I'd be concerned because the talk that's coming out of Donald Trump is more consistent with Putin's agenda than Zelensky's.
What are you watching for next? So as we wrap up the segment, like, what's the number one thing on your radar right now, Jennifer?
I would say that over the course of the next week, the biggest thing will be whether the Senate is willing to just accept everything that Donald Trump pushes forward when it comes to these nominees. Are they going to provide the check that it seems like they might be positioned to? If they don't, and they don't do it now, then he's basically going to be able to get whatever he wants for at least the next 2 years.
Got it. Really interesting. All right, Jennifer, thanks so much. Really appreciate it. Jennifer Lawless, professor at University of Virginia. That's like a nice tell to look at, right? Like, it's tangible. It's easy for you and I to understand rather than trying to understand which policies may be implemented, what, where, when, how.
Right, exactly. So, I mean, again, some of these nominations could be more contentious than some of the others.
And how they push back. All right, let's take a look at some of the sectors. That's going to be coming up. So I mentioned one sector that definitely has no love, offshore wind. We know that. But then the question becomes, like, what about autos? We get a lot of auto parts and used parts from Canada. Also, let's not forget lumber, by the way. That's a big thing, too. We got to rebuild also a lot of LA, steel and aluminum, etc. So what the trade war with Canada could mean for that auto industry. Joe Levington is Bloomberg Intelligence Global Director of Credit Research, and he will be joining us on that as well. Taking a look on this market on the second day of President Trump's administration, equities pretty much not going anywhere fast. We also get earnings trickling out. We get Netflix after the bell. That's going to be really fun. That's going to be huge. I hear it's about sports and live things.
Okay.
This is Bloomberg.
listening to Bloomberg Intelligence with Paul Sweeney and Alex Steele on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Alex Steele, Paul Sweeney here. We're live in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. We're streaming live on YouTube as well, so you can head over to youtube.com, search Bloomberg Podcast, and that's where you'll find us. All right, we're talking all about tariffs here. That seems to be a policy item for the new Trump administration. I'm trying to gauge kind of what impact that could have on various products. Let's think about automobiles. It seems like we get a lot of autos from both Canada and Mexico, so that could be a thing. So let's check in with Joel Levington. He's a global director of credit research with Bloomberg Intelligence. He joins us here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. Joel, let's put a price tag on what could it mean for U.S. consumers if, in fact, we get some tariffs on goods coming out of Canada and Mexico. What does it mean for the auto business?
Well, it means higher prices for consumers, for sure, if that happens, right? The autos are going to pass that on as much as they can. And prices are already at all-time record highs.
Are they?
Yes, yeah. Okay. It's about $51,000 for your typical car in the U.S., so crazy high prices.
Gosh. So can you just help us understand what comes from Canada to the U.S. when it comes to autos? So I usually think about we're manufacturing in Mexico and then bringing the cars in to the U.S. Where does Canada stay?
Yeah, well, there's lots of componentry that comes both from Canada as well as from Mexico that's getting impacted. If you're looking at the car companies themselves, you know, Volvo tends to stand out as really an anomaly on the rougher side. You know, like I think credit readers have pointed to about a 35% impact to EBITDA in a worst case scenario. So that's, you know, more than a third of their profitability would go out the window if it was fully enacted and they weren't able to figure out how to get any cost saves.
So what are the auto companies saying, or what have they been saying on maybe some of the recent earnings calls? Are they how concerned are they that this could happen and could impact their business?
Yeah, you know, the companies really haven't said all that much, right? They're kind of keeping it close to the vest. I think what's more interesting is that the credit markets really haven't done anything about them either. So this is a clear and present exposure that is not fully baked into auto bonds.
Okay, so which car company should we be more sensitive to when it comes, say, to car debt, auto loans?
Yeah, well, you know, like what our analysis is we basically took a look at the harshest scenarios that we possibly could, then try to cut them down, compare it to what credit raters were thinking. What comes up is really names that are already in trouble, maybe getting like the knockout punch here. So names like a Volkswagen or a Stellantis or Nissan, they come off as most vulnerable as tariffs being like a tipping point, you know, like pushing them, I guess, over the edge or into the goal line, and into the end zone, potential credit rating downgrades. Conversely, names like BMW, Mercedes, and Ford look a little bit less impacted by some of the trends that would happen if tariffs played out.
Well, just if I'm GM or Ford, how much do I build, or how much do I have in Canada, in Mexico? Is it a big piece?
Well, not really for Ford, but for General Motors, almost all of their big trucks have Mexico exposure. And so that becomes a risk. And, you know, like if you're thinking about short-term policy versus long-term, if you're a manufacturer, and how are you going to, you know, manufacture things for years and years to come? Do you pay up and get impacted by tariffs, or do you rebuild your manufacturing supply chain and invest heavily into the U.S.? My guess is like that is a very expensive and hard process to do, and they will focus more, I would think, on trying to get the policies toned down.
Do you feel like if we do get, say, worst case scenario tariffs with Canada and Mexico, do we feel it mostly in the equity price or at the debt?
I think you're going to see it more on the equity side. That is much more extreme. A case of General Motors might be a 20 or 25% hit to EBITDA would be kind of the way that the credit raters would look at it. But they would be fine in terms of their ratings and their balance sheet. And therefore, you wouldn't really see a tremendous push on the bonds, where I think you could see a much more impactful hit to the equity side.
Do we have any history to guide us as to the ability of an auto manufacturer to pass along such tariff price increases?
I don't think that there's any great data on that, Paul. I guess what I would say is, like, when it comes to something like this, I'm sure that they would all not necessarily work together, but I think that's where they would all start. It's the easiest thing to do is to try to push it on. And if everybody's pushing it on, and you could have that as a line as a government tax charge to it, the dealer would have a way of showcasing it that this is not us, this is what the government is doing.
And it's so interesting because you guys have a scenario methodology. Thank you.
Oh, yes.
That anesthesia, can't do it. So yeah, you guys have a great bar chart that shows like the ones that get hit the most, like Volvo cars, GM, and Stellantis, and those are like the everyday people cars. The ones that get hit the least are like a BMW and Mercedes. Like I'm not buying a BMW and Mercedes.
Right. Well, not many people buy BMWs and Mercedes anyway. They lease them, which is another way to
okay. All right. No, fair enough. But just like it's going to hurt the lower rung cars, right?
100%.
Which is even harder to buy now anyway.
Yes, and if anything, if you're saying it becomes more difficult and that puts a strain on demand, that eventually goes back to headcount at these companies and their supplier peers, which is something that no president wants to do, is impact in a negative way the amount of people that are employed in the United States.
20 seconds. What's SAR going to be this year?
Yeah, I think STAR most people have in the high 15s kind of range, so pretty flat.
And days of 17 and change, they're over?
Yeah, but it's really a mix shift in that you have a much higher priced cars at a lower volume equals more profits, and that's kind of been the game plan for the last several years for the autos.
All right. Joe Levenson, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Joe Levenson, he's a global director of credit research for Bloomberg Intelligence, follows a lot of the autos and the manufacturing sectors as well from the credit perspective. Again, kind of sussing out kind of what the risks could be for some of these global auto companies in a world where tariffs are going up potentially on some of our big trading partners, most notably Canada and Mexico. So we'll keep on top of that.
I'm like really into this lumber thing.
Yes, I didn't think about that. But
No,
you're right,
I have to give credit where it's due. Matt Miller and I were talking about it last week when we were on commercial break for TV. So that was definitely something. All right. Well, for our listeners in the U.S., here's a reminder. Go ahead and listen to us via satellite radio on Sirius XM channel 121. Access the world's only global audio business network, coast to coast, 24 hours a day.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney.
The real outperformance has been in U.S. corporate high yield.
Are the companies lean enough? Have they trimmed all the fat?
The semiconductor business is a really cyclical business.
Breaking market headlines and corporate news from across the globe.
Do investors like the M&A that we've seen?
These are two big-time blue-chip companies.
The window between the peak and cut changing super fast.
Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Happy Tuesday, everybody. I'm Alex Steele alongside Paul Sweeney. He's back from the beach. He's got a little bit of an Irish tan there. This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. We have a great hour lined up for you. We're just about 15 minutes away from Brian Moynihan, Bank of America Chairman and CEO, speaking with John Farrow and Lisa Bromwitz over in Davos, which I think is probably warmer than it is here right now.
I think so.
I'm just putting it out there. I could be false, but I'm just putting it out there. We'll also talk more about the Trump presidency on its second day. Ed Mills, Washington policy analyst and managing director over at Raymond James, will join us in just moments. Plus, we got Netflix after the bell. I'm told it's all about those live sports. Geetha Ranganathan, Bloomberg intelligence analyst on U.S. media, will join us as well. Plus, Nancy Cook is a Bloomberg senior national political correspondent on her Big Take story. She really outlined President Trump, the revenge versus the legacy. I found it a fascinating read into how to look at President Trump over the next 4 years. But let's kick it all off here with a business flash, and for that, we go to Charlie Pellin.
Thank you very much, Alex and Paul. Welcome back, Paul. Here's what's going on. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, all advancing. NASDAQ, though, has been swinging between gains and losses. Briefly, it was negative just a second ago. Right now, up 6, little change there. The S&P up 25, higher by 0.4%. Back to work Tuesday. For most people, we've got the Dow up 333, gain there of 0.8%. And as Alex mentioned, the Russell 2000 index of small cap shares certainly outperforming. That index now up by 1.3%. Again, the S&P higher by 0.4%. 10-year 4.56% with a 2-year 4.26%. Gold up $30 the ounce, $27.38, a gain of 1.1%. West Texas Intermediate crude oil down 1.9%, $76.43 a barrel. And Bitcoin right now up 1.4%, almost at $104,000. Traders today focused on the prospects for economic growth and corporate profits under President Trump. Gary Cohn is vice chairman at IBM. He served as director of the National Economic Council in the first Trump administration.
We obviously went through an inauguration and change of power in the United States yesterday. We know that's fairly positive for business. On the fundamental level, it's positive for business. It's a pro-business. It's a smart regulatory environment. So everyone's thinking that's very good for business. But I think we're going to ultimately have to see what the year brings because there's still more unknowns than knowns in the equation at this point.
Gary Cohn, vice chairman at IBM, in an interview broadcast live on Bloomberg Radio this morning from the World Economic Forum in Davos. And as we have been mentioning, among the names reporting today after the close of trading, we will be hearing from Netflix. Netflix ahead of earnings up by 0.7%. And briefly, Southwest Airlines cutting 270 pilot positions across its Denver and Atlanta operations. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Charlie, I don't understand that Southwest News. I thought we had a shortage of pilots out there in the world.
Indeed, I would have thought that too, but overall, 155 positions being cut in Denver. And Paul, very briefly, the reason why this may come back to affect flyers is one of the things that they're doing is that they are cutting out some of the pilots and keeping fewer planes in Denver overnight for those morning departures.
Gotcha.
So that could come back to affect a lot of travelers hoping to get out of Denver early in the morning.
Yeah, very good stuff. All right, Charlie Pello, thank you so much. We appreciate that. Alex Steele, Paul Sweeney, we're live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, streaming live on YouTube as well. So head over to youtube.com and search Bloomberg Podcast. That's where you'll find us. Got some green on the screen as Charlie was just reporting. Let's see where the action is under the hood. We welcome Isabel Lee, cross-asset reporter at Bloomberg News. She joins us here in our New York City studio. Isabel, what are you looking at this morning?
Green on the screen, but Tesla is down around 3%. And this comes after Piper Sandler raised its price target on Tesla to 500 from around 315. So that implies a roughly 17% increase from the last price. Tesla is now trading at around 412. We'll get more insight in the next earnings announcement on January 29. But it's interesting because this comes after Trump considers eliminating subsidies and policies that favor electric vehicles. So this is a headline that just crossed Bloomberg today. So this lays the groundwork for moves that risk slowing adoption of cleaner cars in the U.S. And this also comes after Chinese Vice President Han Zheng met Elon Musk and other leaders last week. This underscores that Beijing's efforts to set a positive tone in ties with the U.S. before at least Trump took office is really an important part. Han said U.S. firms are welcome in China and urged American companies like Tesla to seize the opportunity. So lots of really mixed news over there.
Totally.
And it's interesting because, I mean, Trump is now buddies with, Elon Musk is buddies with Trump.
Like you would think that like a buddy Elon Musk would mean something good for EVs, but maybe it's another situation.
I think what it does here is just says you take away the EVs, Tesla needs the EVs less to drive demand than do the other OEMs. So on a relative basis, this favors Tesla versus the Fords, the Stellantis, the
because he's not, I mean, I guess he's going to try and make like an affordable EV, but he can still sell the expensive ones.
Right. I think what the play here is what a lot of investors are saying is this is, again, net beneficial to Tesla vis-a-vis the other manufacturers who may need the incentive more. So
on a relative basis.
Yeah,
that's
that makes
a great
sense
point.
because Tesla's down, but the rest of the EVs are up, actually.
Interesting. Okay, what else you got?
Apple, also red. It's down around 4%. And of course, it received a pair of analyst downgrades. And it just really shows that the latest sign of like soft iPhone sales are really worrying investors. It got downgrades from Loop Capital and Jefferies. So, and just 8.5% of the analysts tracked by Bloomberg have a bearish rating, while about 63% have a buy rating. But still, I mean, if you're increasing in your down ratings, and we have shares falling around 3%, that's really a rocky start to the year. And this comes after yesterday we had news that sales of iPhone plunged 18% in China. And China is, again, a big market for not only Apple, but a lot of luxury goods. And we know that the economy there really isn't doing well. Youth unemployment is low. Consumers are cash-strapped. So they're becoming more and more conscious. And their own smartphones are doing well, like Huawei.
Right. Yep.
Yeah, so it's really a mixed bag. And all of those reasons confluence why Apple isn't really doing well.
Yeah, that was an interesting double downgrade, particularly into that. With the Mag 7, then it's a little mixed, right? You got Apple, Tesla getting hurt, but then Amazon and Google are up by about over 1%. So the Mag 7 is sort of neutral in some ways, a little bit negative, but neutral on the equity market. All right, Isabel, thanks a lot. Isabel Lee joining us from Bloomberg Markets. Okay, let's go now to the policy part. I loved what Paul was saying about the arb between EVs, between Tesla and everybody else, that on a relative basis, it's less bad for Tesla. Ed Mills, Washington policy analyst and managing director over at Raymond James, joins us. Hey, Ed, just on that point, what do you make of the fact you got Tesla down 3%? You have the EV mandate sort of being rolled back by President Trump. What do you make of that part of the policy and its impact?
Yeah, Alex, it's a good question. I don't think there's going to be a lot of policies that are enacted that are not favorable to Elon Musk. So there is the EV mandate that's going away. There will be a conversation when Congress deals with tax cuts if the tax credits go away. But I do think that if Elon steps in and says, this is important to me, they stay. Or if he says, look, I actually have a better position vis-a-vis everyone else, he's going to let the market decide and be able to compete there. So I don't view this as a huge issue. 3% move in Tesla is not a huge move. And you look at some of the moves that have occurred since the election, those are the moves that matter to him.
Ed, what's your takeaway from day one yesterday? Very busy day for this administration, for this new president. What were some of the things that kind of stood out to you?
Yeah. Paul, I think that the interesting thing to me is when I've talked to folks in and around the Trump administration, they are insisting that they are going to go much faster in Trump 2.0 than they did in Trump 1.0. And so we've had a lot of questions about tariffs and that they didn't go in on day one. Don't have that as your takeaway that the tariffs are not coming. They are absolutely coming. They're going to be aggressive, and they're going to come this year. In Trump 1.0, he spent 3 years negotiating with China before he got a phase 1 trade deal that was never implemented. So China very much on that list. Canada, Mexico, real issues there. On energy, big unleashing of opportunities. And on energy, it's not about just oil and natural gas, but there was a lot of conversations about critical minerals as well as rare earth minerals. Our definition of energy is expanding. Those are opportunities to rebuild supply chains here in the United States.
Right, as long as you're not offshore wind, because that is verboten, and that feels like that is definitely not,
He
nothing's
does
good
not
coming
like
from
the
that
wind
anytime
mills.
soon from the Trump administration. Which, talk about critical minerals, though, which makes the Canada thing even more of a head scratcher, because they have all that stuff. Even the non-critical minerals, like or rare earths, they still have the stuff that we need to build the things.
Well, I was in Canada all last week. I was in Montreal, Toronto, talking to investor after investor. And the thing that they focused on, and what I've been talking to clients at Raymond James about, is if you have something that Donald Trump wants, that's part of the solution. So Trump is going to put tariffs on, but a deal will be struck. And if we expand out the definition of energy to include things that you own, or you have as a natural resource, you should get excited about that. So a deal with Canada that includes critical minerals and rare earth mineral extraction, refinement, and building a supply chain that is de-risked from China is an opportunity, not necessarily a risk, Alex, for Canada and other allies.
Interesting.
Hey, Ed, talk to us about how you think this immigration and border security policies will evolve over time. Obviously, a big part of the campaign, a very big issue for many American voters. But boy, if you think about the economic impact, where do these migrant workers go? Will they go to agricultural and construction are the two big areas, as well as hospitality. But those two big areas, agricultural and construction, that could be a problem. How do you think that's going to play out?
Paul, and I think you're right to point this out, because when we think about some of the policies that could be market positive or market neutral, negative, the immigration executive orders probably for clients at Raymond James have been the area where we've gotten the most concern. Is this going to lead to labor market shortages? Is this going to be inflationary? We saw labor shortages as we came out of COVID that had a real market impact. I think this is an area where we're going to get headlines that are very aggressive, but the follow-through actions, I guess would take the under in terms of the actual number of immigrants that are deported from the United States as a result of this. I think they're going to be very flashy. They're going to have a signing of the Lake and Riley Act within the next day or two. It's going to be the first bill that Donald Trump signs into law. There will be deportations, but the first term of Donald Trump had fewer deportations than the second term of Barack Obama. So it is a conversation about there will be folks that are deported, but if it's folks with jobs, I think it's going to be less likely that there's going to be an actual labor market impact. I could be wrong, but that's what I'm tracking.
We also know today in the next few hours that there may be, quote, a massive announcement of things. So President Trump will start his first day in full in the office. He has a bunch of high-level meetings. Early in the afternoon, he's supposed to meet with two congressional partners, House Speaker Mike Johnson and Senate Majority Leader John Thune. And apparently they're going to discuss the legislative agenda and the approach to passing one or two reconciliation bills. This is according to people familiar with the matter. Okay, what does that mean? Like, what would a massive announcement mean with the three of them?
So I think if it is one big, beautiful bill, as they've talked about, it is an extension of the tax cuts, but it's also a package that is immigration funding, defense funding, and permitting reform under energy, and more leasing than what was released yesterday through the executive orders. If they want to do something quick, you separate the immigration, defense, energy out of that. And what's really interesting there, Alex, is that we've had this focus on DOGE, and that really impacted the defense contractors and government service contractors to the extent that we could see $100 to $200 billion plus up in the defense budget this year. And when you look at the executive order for DOGE, they want a massive upgrade in IT spend and in systems within the federal government for efficiency. That sounds like a lot more spending than a lot of cuts from where I sit. And on the tax cuts, they absolutely get extended. The big conversation right now in DC is, can you get a score that actually allows you to make them permanent by just saying all of the current policy, just extending that out is technically $0 because we're not making changes. That's not priced into this market.
So, all right, we've got a bunch of issues that, the administration would like to get through. The question, though, is while the Republicans control both houses of Congress, very, very slight edges there. In reality, given your experience there, Ed, What percentage of this stuff can they get done? Can they get some of the hard stuff done, do you think?
So I think that the base case, Paul, is that extension of the tax cuts in adding something on that defense, immigration, energy provisions. I think it is going to be very difficult. I don't think we look at the majority in the House and have any concept that that is not going to be a fragile flower of consensus, very difficult to hold together, 1 or 2 votes, and it all gets sunk. A different way of thinking about it, though, is when you are the 1 or 2 individuals that is standing in way of the Trump agenda, the pressure on you is going to be so difficult. To vote no is to vote to get yourself unelected next term. So the fact it's so narrow actually could be something at the end of the day. The more you get the Trump agenda on the line, to vote no on that, besides Massey, probably everyone is on board.
Interesting, right. So that would be a definite something to stomach. And we were talking earlier to a professor at the University of Virginia about how Congress deals with the confirmation process of all of the nominees will also tell us how willing Republicans may or may not be to go against that agenda. What sector are you telling clients to focus on the most, if you had to pick?
Financials. I think we're going to see massive consolidation, especially among smaller banks. We're going to see a rescission of some of the merger guidance that went in just in September. We see a massive deregulatory push, something that really was under the radar. On Christmas Eve, the banks sued to overturn the stress test that the Federal Reserve does, CCAR. If that gets overturned and banks have more capital kind of freedom, that they're not worried that the Fed could come in a year from now and change that stress test and deny them the ability to return shareholder capital, I think you get a re-rating in the banks. And one of the biggest debates at Raymond James is there was a lot of optimism in 2017 and a lot of promises. What's different this time? In the fact that the Supreme Court made several rulings in the last several years, especially last year, just upends what you can do on regulation in Trump 2.0 versus what you were able to do in 1.0. So it's going to be much more aggressive in those heavily regulated areas. I put banks at the top of that as a key winner.
Great stuff, Ed. I'm sure we're going to be talking to you a lot going forward. Ed Mills, Managing Director, Washington Policy Analyst for Raymond James. Coming up in just a matter of moments, we're going to speak with Brian Moynihan, Bank of America Chairman, CEO. He speaks with Bloomberg Television anchors Jonathan Farrow, Lisa Bromwitz from Davos, looking at the Bank of America stock, like a lot of the big bank stocks, on a trailing 12-month basis, doing very, very well, up 45%. And we just saw some of the big banks report some really, really strong earnings just in the last week or so. Net interest margins positive, and the capital markets business across their fixed income, commodities, credit, strong across the board. Talking about a better deal activity calendar for 2025. So let's listen to Brian Moynihan, Bank of America, with Bloomberg Television. Let's take a listen.
America's CEO.
Hey guys, great to be with you. Day 2 of the World Economic Forum here in Davos, Switzerland. Mine's firmly elsewhere in Washington, D.C. Isn't that right, Lisa? 24 hours of conversations about how great America is and how the rest of the world will struggle with the incoming president, Donald Trump.
Yeah, every conversation here at Davos has been, what's America going to do? How can I leverage myself to be in the best position possible? And, oh yeah, what's the latest headline?
Brian Moynihan alongside us, the chairman and CEO of Bank of America. We're going to cover all of that through the next 8 minutes or so. There's an important occasion to mark, 15 years at the top of Bank of America.
No, it's been an honor to lead the company, and we've had some fun. And it was interesting to start, but for the last 10 years or so, we've been on a roll, just producing responsible growth, and the team does a great job. And we can take pride. We've put the company to where it should be as one of the great companies in the world.
Beyond interesting, 15 years ago, it was the absorption of Countrywide Financial. It was Merrill. It's a very, very different bank in a very, very different moment. And that phrase you used is one you've used so many times, responsible growth. There is a feeling that maybe we move towards something else in the world of banking over the next few years. Some might say it's sort of reckless growth. We're just going to go for it. How would you describe the future?
So what you're hearing is enthusiasm for, in the investment banking side, particularly transactions, right? For a long time, for the last couple of years, it's been hard to get a transaction through. And what stops a seller from selling or a buyer from buying is, if this thing is delayed, I'm exposed. And so what they'll do is they'll push it through. So there's a lot of enthusiasm that there'll be better growth in the United States, a lot of enthusiasm by the bankers saying these deals can get done so I can go have the strategic conversation. And it's just not another idea that goes through the system. And everybody says, that's a great idea, but it's not going to be a great idea. Let's go do it. Or a great idea, I don't want to do it, but it's a more of a substance base than it is more of a worry about the environment around us.
Are you basically saying that there's more enthusiasm, that there is conviction and will to actually get stuff done?
Yeah, I think you saw some deals getting announced, and you'll see more deals getting announced. In our sector, in banking, especially in the United States, the consolidation is still far away from being done. There'll always be big banks, there'll always be small banks, but you ought to let people make a decision what they want to do, and there haven't been a lot of bank deals done, bank-to-bank deals. We can't do them. It's not legal, but as investment banking, we can help other people do them, and there haven't been a lot done because just the uncertainty of getting caught in a transaction and having issues. So the belief that they should promote the banks consolidating, getting more efficient, passing that through to customers, passing that through to small businesses, et cetera, is a different, will be a change.
Well, there's the banking sector specifically, and some of the deregulation and whether some of these mergers and consolidation will be allowed. And then there's the broader corporate sector and some of the enthusiasm we've seen and we've heard from the city's head of banking from JP Morgan. Yep. How much do you see that being maybe a little premature based on some of the policies coming down the pike and the uncertainty around debt deficit and rates?
Well, I think you have to divorce a little bit some of the fiscal work that has to be done, and incoming Treasury Secretary and others have to take very seriously this question of how do we manage the revenue stream, the expense stream, and the amount of debt, and get it all to work out. One of the ways that becomes easier is if you have more activity and more things going on. So I think the enthusiasm you hear from the bankers is more structurally that the belief is that even starting yesterday, you don't have the constraint that you have, so you could go. If there's more that enables more, that's good stuff. But right now, it'll stop it going in the wrong direction. And look, our medium small-sized businesses, their biggest complaint last time I was here, and we talked to the administration about it, was the biggest complaint was, you're in my pocket, you're slowing me down, I can't get things done, I want a permit to do something, it takes forever, I want your labor rules, all this stuff was going on just over and over. And small, medium-sized business don't have the thousands of people that big companies have to figure it all out, and they're figuring it out on their own. The same person is running the business at night sitting there saying, so what does this new taxation strategy on Social Security mean to me? How does it apply? How do I have to change all my systems? And so they're just saying, if you just stop, things will get better.
So you're the #1 lender to small businesses in the United States. Give us the read on things right now. Are they already making those decisions to make a move, to make those investments that they were on hold over the last 4 years doing? Are they already making that move?
So if you come over the last, say, 6-8 months or so, that it went from regulation and inflation. The inflation's kind of come down as their worry right now. And what's actually interesting is they're going back to labor shortages and the right labor. Now, the interesting thing about that has a question about immigration and all the stuff going on. But what they're feeling then is demand. I need people to do things. And so they're starting to feel the demand steady. Remember, when the Fed was raising rates high, their cost of borrowing went up a lot. They went from 300 basis points over an index that went up by 500 basis points. That's a big number. And so that caused them to say, let me be careful. And then as the rates come down a little bit, they feel a little better. Now they're saying, okay, I have the opportunity to grow, but can I get the people? And remember, that was the 2021-22 timeframe. So in there's got to be a solution to this immigration that doesn't constrain those small, medium-sized businesses from growing, or they're going to start letting us know.
Would you say, just to jump in, would you say we are supply constrained? Do you think we are prone to have these bursts of inflation?
Yes and no, and we don't know, honestly, because the stimulus after the pandemic, there was so much more than there maybe had to be by technical economic discussion. It's hard to say whether we're supply constrained and other things. And we're supply constraints because of cutoff of supply and the stoppage of goods coming in the country and shipping and all that stuff that we went through. So you haven't gotten to a real normalized side of that yet, but that's the blame for the current thing. I think the supply shortages can mitigate if, we got to be a little careful about labor supply. We got to be a little careful about the tariffs impacting supply and things. But I think the second sourcing's gone on. People are finding places to get stuff. So I'm not quite sure that's going to be the issue. But a lot of what we think it was the issue is actually the pandemic, the stimulus, and the impact of the pandemic on supply that's worked us through the system.
So John started with the fact that you've been at Bank of America for 15 years. Yep. We keep hearing about succession plans in different places. What's your succession plan?
What, are you trying to throw me out?
No, not at all. I'm just wondering, because this is something that we keep hearing about.
Wait to the very end. There's still 3 minutes on the clock.
No, I want to ask
the last question.
Okay,
the last one.
Okay, all right.
The way the fascination with all this is interesting, and one, it just means we're all getting older. So, but the reality is, we run a process in our company through the top 3 layers, including for the CEO. succession, every 6 months we go through everything. Who are the immediate successors for every one of our teammates' jobs? And we have a slate, and we go from a slate. Because if you run a big company, people leave for a whole, they retire, they get another job, whatever, and you're always filling jobs. And so with the way, the board will make a choice at some point. I'm not going anywhere unless they throw me out. They know that. But my job, and one of the biggest jobs I have, is preparing people for what it would be like to run this company out there, and that's important. So we do a lot with our team to get them used to the experiences and get them to learn more about the trade-offs you have to make at the top of the house, because if you come through a business or come through a function, you haven't made those trade-offs. That's part of our general strategy. And so we talk to our board, but you never hear us discuss A is in and B is not. That to me is the worst thing you can do. I went through that process in the end of 2009 where there was day-to-day speculation. That's not the way to do it.
Well, thank you for that very diplomatic
You'll be the
answer.
first person to tell.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. We only have about 30 seconds. You said something to us when we were at Bank of America, that AI would basically keep the staff the same size, but increase the footprint of business. Do you stand by that?
Yeah, there are two facts I'll give you. One is we run the company on the nominal amount of dollars of expenses we did 10 years ago almost now. Nominal, not inflation adjusted. And we run it on 30,000 less people. That is all digitization. And AI is an extension of automation, digitization, models, et cetera. Automating work, taking out work, and automate, therefore you don't need. And I think AI keeps going. The idea is if we're good, we'll keep adjusting where the teammates end up. So it might not be the same 212,000 people. 213,000 people doing the same thing 10 years from now.
Yeah.
But my guess is that our employment levels will stay relatively static. There's just even more towards stuff that can't be replicated near term by AI.
Brian, you're a gent, and you've been super generous with your time, and you show me up every year because you always come out here with a suit jacket on, and I'm sitting here with like a winter jacket.
Yeah, but I actually
I know you've been influenced by Brian.
No, it's actually just a lot warmer.
Brian Moynihan, the Bank of America CEO and Chairman. Brian, thank you. Guys, back to you.
All right, that was Jonathan Farrow and Lisa Abramowitz. They're in Davos. Speaking with Brian Moynihan, Bank of America Chairman and CEO, about the future of Bank of America. Again, that stock doing very well, 45% over the trailing 12 months. With our news in New York City, let's go to Mr. Charlie Pellet.
All right, I thank you very much, Paul Sweeney. Here's what's going on, updating you on markets. We've got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, all advancing. Bank of America shares, by the way, after that Brian Moynihan interview right now, BAC up by 1.3%. We've got the Dow up 424, higher by 1%. S&P 500 index pushing higher as well. Right now, the S&P is advancing 32 points at 6,028, up 0.5%. NASDAQ up 24. That is a gain now of 0.1%. 10-year 4.56%. The 2-year 4.26%. Gold surging $34 the ounce, up 1.3%. West Texas Intermediate crude down 1.5%, 76.68 a barrel, and Bitcoin now up 3.1%, 105,600, 105,600 on Bitcoin. And this Bloomberg Business Flash brought to you by Oracle. Attention, growing businesses. Oracle is offering to cut your current cloud bill in half if you move to Oracle Cloud Infrastructure for new U.S. customers with minimal financial commitment. Offer ends March 31st. See if your company qualifies at oracle.com/Bloomberg. Recapping, S&P up 0.5%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thanks so much. Alex Steele here alongside Paul Sweeney. This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. We bring you all the top news in business, economics, and finance through our lens of our Bloomberg Intelligence folks. They cover 2,000 companies and 130 industries all around the world. We also love to tap the big take story every day on Bloomberg. It's super in-depth, great reporting of all the main issues and stories of our time. And no surprise today, but the big take story is about President Trump. And this is where I got that point about sort of the revenge versus the legacy of President Trump. Nancy Cook is Bloomberg's senior national political correspondent. She joins us now. I was talking about this earlier in the show, and I was like, I read something, and it was really smart, and it was your piece. And it was sort of the dichotomy which we saw yesterday between those two speeches plus for President Trump, right? One is, will he have the legacy and what it will look like? And the other is that quest for revenge. Walk us through what your story is about.
Well, it's really about sort of these two impulses that he has and that his aides are really thinking about as he, begins his second term in the White House. And the first impulse is really to, govern well, leave a legacy. Some of his aides for the last few months have been talking about sort of wanting him to have as big of a legacy as Ronald Reagan. They want him to preside over a booming economy, energy exploration, getting what they see as immigration under control. And they really really want, his success to be built around governing. But there's a whole nother crew of Trump MAGA people who really also want retribution and revenge to be a part of that. They want people to pay for the investigations that they say Trump endured. They want people to pay for, coming after him with legal challenges, the Jack Smith investigation, the New York hush money case. They want people to pay, and also just critics, career government officials who maybe raise questions about Trump's first term. This crew wants Trump to pay. And so the story just really talks about how the competing impulses of Trump's first term is going to be between sort of wanting to govern well, but also wanting to get revenge. And I think that a central theme of his presidency this second time around will be what the balance of that looks like.
Nancy, do we have any idea who President Trump really listens to in the second administration? It seemed like in the first administration you had Jared Kushner and Ivanka there. Who's got his ear these days, do you think?
Well, it's a different crew than last time. I would say Susie Wiles, who is his chief of staff and the first female chief of staff at the White House ever, really is hugely respected. He really listens to her and really takes her counsel. She's worked for him, on and off since 2016. She ran his Florida political operations in both the 2016 campaign and 2020, and then joined him, his campaign full time when he, decided to run for a third time. They are very close, and he does listen to her. And then she has a group of very loyal aides around her who worked on the campaign. And I feel like, it's a pretty well-oiled machine. And a lot of those people are were Florida-based. And I would say it's a really different staff than it was for his first administration.
What kind of legacy do you think President Trump is after right now?
I think right now he's feeling good and he's not feeling under attack. And so I think right now he, is probably a little bit more drawn to the Ronald Reagan model. But you have to remember he also pardoned 1,500 January 6th people last night, including people who violently assaulted police officers that day. And that is also part of the revenge. And so I think, it's going to vacillate between one and the other. I do think that he thinks that he could be a better president than people give him credit for. Biden thought the same thing. And so we'll have to see what, happens over the next 4 years. He and his team are riding high right now. They feel like they won all 7 battleground states. They put together a new coalition, brought some new people into the Republican Party. And so I will be curious to see, what happens a year from now or 2 years from now when they're not riding as high or when he feels under attack and what that looks like at that point.
Nancy, what do you think are kind of the to-do list for the first 100 days? Is this a president that views these first 100 days, as other presidents do, as a time to really get stuff done?
I mean, we saw yesterday he signed a ton of executive orders, everything related to immigration, energy, the federal workforce. Today he is meeting with congressional leaders to talk about the legislative agenda. He has what we're expecting to be an announcement about infrastructure at 4. So he's really hitting the ground running. Susie Wiles, his chief of staff, has told people that she views the first 100 days as kind of an artificial metric. They are really looking at the first 2 years as the key time to get things done. That's when we know that Republicans will control both the House and Senate. The Republicans have total control right now in Washington. And I think that they view the first 2 years as the key time to get things done.
Right. So I was wondering, it's really until the midterms, right? When things may change. Also, any leverage that President Trump may have over individual members that are up for re-election, that might change as well.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And you have to remember, he's a lame duck president, too. He can't serve again. And so I think that they view that, too, as part of this calculus of the first 2 years of being very important. But we're already seeing them move at a very dizzying pace, and I think that that's going to continue.
Immigration, deportation, how aggressive do you think the president can be here?
Well, he's already trying. I mean, he signed executive orders yesterday to change the asylum process, to, shut down the border via a national emergency. They were canceling immigration appointments that people had already that were, legal immigration, people trying to come here legally. And so I think that, Stephen Miller, who is sort of the architect of his immigration policies, is a deputy chief of staff in the White House. He has a huge amount of power, just like last time. And I think that he is telling both members of Congress, but also he's telling Trump himself that, you need to move quickly on immigration. This is a quote unquote quick win for us. And so I think that they are going to spend a lot of time in the first 6 weeks to 2 months on immigration.
All right, we really appreciate it, Nancy. It was a wonderful piece. Nancy Cook, Bloomberg senior national political correspondent, on our big take story of the day. And you can read more of this story on the Bloomberg, also bloomberg.com/big take. Really great reporting. Highly recommend it. All right, coming up, it's earnings season. You get that? Remember that?
Oh,
it's happening.
yeah,
It's a
yep.
thing. D.R. Horton came out this morning.
Yep.
We get Travelers tomorrow morning, the insurer with exposure to California. And then tonight, 4 p.m.
Boom.
Netflix.
Yep.
We're going to get the latest with Geetha Ranganathan, Bloomberg intelligence senior analyst on U.S. media. What to look out for, what regions to look out for, live sports to look out for. We got you all covered later on in just a moment. This is Bloomberg.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 11:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We have got the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ all advancing. About 420 shares in the S&P 500 index are higher, ahead of what the White House is calling a major infrastructure initiative that to be unveiled. 4 o'clock Wall Street time. We'll have the president's remarks for you live here on Bloomberg Radio. S&P right now up 29, a gain of 0.5%. The S&P now at 6,026. The Dow up 405, up 0.9%, while NASDAQ is up 9, a gain there of just under 0.1%. The 10-year at 4.57%, the 2-year 4.27%. Gold up $31 the ounce, up 1.2%, $27.39 the ounce, and West Texas Intermediate crude down 1.8%, $76.45 for a barrel of WTI. Bitcoin right now just about $105,000. The World Economic Forum is underway in Davos, Switzerland. Bloomberg Radio is there, where moments ago we caught up with Bank of America CEO Brian Moynihan, who told us with the new Trump administration, you will see more deals getting announced and done.
What you're hearing is enthusiasm for, in the investment banking side, particularly transactions, right? For a long time, for the last couple of years, it's been hard to get a transaction through. And what stops a seller from selling or a buyer from buying is, if this thing is delayed, I'm exposed. And so what they'll do is they'll push it through. So there's a lot of enthusiasm that there'll be better growth in the United States, a lot of enthusiasm by the bankers saying these deals can get done.
Bank of America CEO Brian Moynihan, he says small businesses are starting to see demand, and when asked about succession, he says he's not going anywhere unless the board says otherwise. Bank of America shares up 1.1%. Recapping, S&P higher by 30 now, up 0.5% for on-demand news 24 hours a day. Subscribe to Bloomberg News now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pell, thanks a lot. Alex Steele here alongside Paul Sweeney. This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. We bring you all the top news in business, economics, and finance through our lens of our Bloomberg Intelligence folks. And one of them is the best in the business when it comes to media analysts. Geetha Ranganathan, Bloomberg Intelligence Senior Analyst for U.S. Media, joins us on Netflix earnings. I literally have my pen and paper here because we're breaking as I'm on TV. What am I looking for?
Okay, so you are going to look for subscriber numbers, Alex, and this is important because this is the last time that Netflix will be reporting subscriber numbers in its history. So 4Q is the last time. After this, we're going to have to find a whole new set of numbers to focus on. But yes, and subscriber numbers, which we think will be well into, above the 10 million mark. For Netflix for the fourth quarter. And then just going ahead into 2025, remember, we are heading into one of their strongest content slates ever in the history of the company. I mean, this is the year when we're going to see returning seasons of all their hit shows, whether, it's Stranger Things or You or Cobra Kai or Wednesday. And you have, every week you have WWE telecasts that have started, from 2025. So the content slate is huge. Based off of that, they do expect subscriber growth. But of course, we're not going to see those numbers. So then the next metric that we're going to look for is revenue growth. So any guidance that they offer in terms of revenue growth as well as operating margin expectations, those are the numbers that we're really looking for.
Geetha, for the longest time, Netflix said they would not get into live sports. It seems like they're changing their tune there. What do you think this company is going to do with live sports? How big do you ever expect them to be?
I think it's only going to get bigger and bigger, Paul. So, along with the subscriber numbers and the content slate, one of the really big forays that they did make in the fourth quarter was live sports. So you had that big Tyson versus Paul boxing match in mid-November, and then they followed it up on Christmas Day with 2 games, NFL games back-to-back. And we're seeing pretty strong viewership numbers, initial viewership numbers reported by third parties and reported by Netflix for all of those sporting events. Again, we have WWE that they started from, 2025 January this month. And so they are going to continue to make a bigger and bigger investment into the live sports category. And I say that because they do have this really kind of fledgling advertising business. And as we know, live sports tends to be, an advertiser's dream. So they do want to build that advertising business. They have roughly they haven't actually disclosed this, but they have disclosed 70 million active accounts, which translates roughly into about 30 million ad-supported subscribers, we are going to see that business kind of build, ramp up pretty significantly. And they do need events like this. They do need big, splashy sporting events that will not only drive subscribers, but will also drive huge advertising numbers.
Okay, so dumb question. Do we want more paid subscribers in the non-ad video tier for Netflix, or do we want more paid subscribers for the cheaper ad-supported tier?
We need actually a good balance of both of them. So for all of these sporting events, Alex, just to make it clear, even though it is in the non-advertising tier, they're still making advertising revenue. So for an NFL game, for instance, even though I'm a non-ad subscriber, I still have to watch some advertising. So for live sports, they're making ad revenue, whether you're premium or ad-based. But the thing with the ad-based subscriber is that potentially as they get better and better at advertising, as they get better at targeting, they're going to be able to raise their prices to advertisers. They're going to be able to raise CPMs. And as they do that, they're going to be able to raise ARPU. And that's really what the end game is for Netflix. I mean, if you just look at valuation today for Netflix, it's trading at 30 times EBITDA. The only way that you support that kind of valuation is if you have this whole virtuous cycle, right? So it's always been, subscribers, content, pricing, and now it is revenue. And advertising is going to be a big portion of that revenue.
Geetha, I don't know if you saw this, but our good friends over at MoffettNathanson, they upgraded Warner Brothers Discovery from a hold to a buy and downgraded Fox from a buy to a hold. And I read through the note, and I kind of got the sense that they were saying basically, we think there's going to be some consolidation in this media business in 2025 for a variety of reasons. And on that basis, boy, the Warner Brothers Discovery looks pretty darn attractive for potential buyers. Do you think there will be some consolidation in the media space as people realize maybe I just can't compete against Netflix?
Absolutely, Paul. I think definitely this is going to be the big year. I think Comcast in many ways has already kind of set the stage for that. So what they did towards the end of 2024 was they spun out their linear cable networks business. And we think that kind of sets the stage now for so many more deals to happen, whether that's, a Warner Brothers Discovery, whether that's an AMC Networks. All of those deals are waiting to happen. And, as the TV advertising market gets more and more challenged and all of those dollars start moving online, I think they're going to be pressed to do deals.
Do we like that Netflix and all the like are spending a lot of money on content? Like, what's that tipping point where then we don't like that number anymore? And I guess I could add that into Warner Brothers and any of the media guys.
So believe it or not, everybody has actually pulled back pretty dramatically on content spending. So Disney was obviously the big one. They went from about 32 billion to closer to about 24, 25 billion last year. And everybody is now kind of really disciplined when it comes to content spending. Netflix also has been fairly disciplined, I would say. But then if they do start to go after live sports, those are huge investments that they're going to have to make. But they can absolutely support it because they have the scale, almost 300 million subscribers. So I think what Netflix has really done is they do have this insurmountable lead when it comes to subscriber scale, when it comes to profitability. Everybody else is kind of definitely pulling back a little bit. So we are definitely seeing a lot of rationalization in content spending across the landscape, Alex.
2025 box office is supposed to be really big. What should we be looking out for?
Okay, we have all of the big franchises that are coming back. The big number that we're looking for is, will the box office be able to hit the 10 billion mark? But we actually think so. I mean, Disney basically, there's just a lot more volume that we see, Paul, coming into 2025. So we're going from about 90 wide releases in 2024 to closer to about 110 in 2025. And just Disney itself kind of really increasing its output pretty dramatically. You have movies across, whether, it's Avatar, it's Marvel, just across the board, they have so much more content. And they, of course, were a huge outperformer in 2024. And then not just Disney. I mean, you have, a new Mission Impossible movie from Paramount. You have the Superman movie from DC. So it's pretty broad-based.
Finally, we get the next 17,000 avatars. So there is that. The second Wicked. I got the whole list up right now. All right, Geetha, thanks a lot. Really appreciate it. Geetha Ranganathan, Bloomberg Intelligence, CSU U.S. media analyst. And looking at Netflix, that stock up by 0.8%. All right, coming up, we're going back to D.C. with Nathan Dean of Bloomberg Intelligence, day one of the Trump administration. This is Bloomberg.
You're listening to Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Alex Steele, Paul Sweeney live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker studio. We are streaming live on YouTube as well, so head over to youtube.com and search Bloomberg Podcast, and that's where you'll find us. Tom Keene likes to talk about velocity. He likes to keep the velocity up of his Bloomberg Surveillance Radio show. Keep it moving, keep it moving. Boy, the velocity coming out of Washington, D.C. in terms of news flows picked up over the last 48 hours in terms of executive orders and lots of policy pronouncements here. So let's check in with Nathan Dean. He's a senior policy analyst at Bloomberg Intelligence. He is based down in Washington, D.C. Nathan, fast and furious, the executive orders are flying here. You're a policy analyst in D.C. You've seen administrations come and go. What are you focusing on?
Yeah, so, yesterday was President Trump's what he called shock and awe. And, for us looking at these executive orders, they were more awe than shock. What I mean by that is that when we closed our laptops last night, it wasn't really all that surprising what he did. Most of these executive orders he said on the campaign trail that he was going to do. But for those of us looking at the investing side, there were really three areas that are really interesting. First off was, tariffs. This wasn't an executive order. This was a presidential memo. But he said in that impromptu press conference that tariffs on Canada and Mexico are coming by February 1st. Now, we certainly think that these tariffs are coming, but it's just still in negotiation. So I wouldn't be surprised if they get pushed off, but eventually tariffs are coming. Second is the TikTok ban. Our colleague Matt Shelm's looking at this. It doesn't really change the avenue, if you will, if you're Apple or Google, though. There's a lot of exposure, and Senator Tom Cotton continues to point that out, that if you continue to work with TikTok in the United States, you are sort of violating the law, despite what this executive order says. And the third is the energy. I mean, there was, in terms of all the sectors that we cover, energy is the most exposed to presidential authority. And so there was a lot in there in terms of unleashing America's energy independence, drill, baby, drill. But we are certainly interested to see how that plays out further going in terms of the Inflation Reduction Act and any potential tax tweaks they make over the next line or so.
Yeah, let's get to energy just for a second, because, it's me and it sounds interesting. Just the idea of the drill, baby, drill scenario, it does seem like that's moving drillers, but the reality versus the hope feels different. Like, in reality, there's no control over whether or not independent oil producers drill, baby, drill.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, our energy analysts love to point out that we've been drill, baby, drilling already. So what we mean by that is that, like, there's a lot of policy inputs into the energy sector, and this is just one of them. I mean, you have state-level policies, you have the price of oil, you have OPEC and so forth like that. So the president did some actions that I think a lot of the people anticipated, opening up Alaska National Life Refuge, the LNG pause, and so forth. But I don't think the energy sector is all that changed. I mean, certainly looking at the markets today, I think a lot of people are anticipating this, and it's not really going to change the narrative. But the interesting thing for us is the Inflation Reduction Act. When you look at the renewables sector, there's a lot of tax carrots, if you will, that we don't think are going to go away via the congressional method. But President Trump does have the authority by instructing the Treasury Department to start to tweak those tax cuts. It really depends on what Scott Bessent wants to do once he gets into office.
Speaking of just tax cuts, that's a big thing coming up at the end of this year for this administration, perhaps extending them. What's the feeling in D.C. how that will play out?
Yeah, so you mentioned, you just mentioned at the beginning of the segment that, everything's moving so quickly, velocity, but this is where President Trump's going to hit sort of the Washington roadblock. Because, for all the velocity that President Trump wants to move forward with, there's a reality here that you can only afford to lose 5 Republican votes, assuming everybody's in their seats, to get these tax cuts extended. The Democrats aren't going to play any part of this reconciliation debate. And so when you have to figure out how to pay for $4.6 trillion worth of tax extensions, or at least get close to it, that's where the party line is going to actually start to split. The House Ways and Means Committee put out a 2-pager saying, here's everything that we are going to potentially cut or could cut subject to political discussion. And there's a lot of things out there, whether it's the SALT deduction, whether it's IRA tax credits that are going to factories in Louisiana. There's a lot of things out there that Republicans want to keep around. And when you can only lose the 4-5 votes, it's going to be extremely challenging debate. House Speaker Mike Johnson wants to get a vote done by April or May. We're telling our clients, don't be surprised if this goes to October.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's something. In terms of sectors, too, like you're mentioning, like energy, super in the midst of massive change that could be impacted by President Trump. The other, honestly, is financials. And we saw that with earnings and the rhetoric as well, like lessening capital regulations and what you do with all that cash. How quick are we to change there?
So there's really no magical wand for deregulation. There's a lot of sentiment going into those valuations in the market, I would argue, because the idea of deregulation is good, and a lot of this capital is going to be returned. Now, the Basel III endgame is likely staved off. This is a planned 9% increase. We don't think it's going to happen this year in terms of capital requirements. But when you have to have the OCC, the FDIC, and the Fed all on board, and with Jerome Powell remaining at the Fed, he may not agree to anything fairly substantial in terms of deregulation. So when it comes to banks in particular, we are calling 2025 the great pause, if you will, because there's really no magic wand for deregulation. It's just going to take time. I think these deregulatory plans are going to come out towards the end of 2025, maybe start to be implemented in 2026. But if I'm a bank investor and I'm banking on the idea of deregulation changing how I operate, you're probably going to see that in 2027 or 2028.
All right, Nathan, super appreciate it. We could have you on every day and just do like one sector. Maybe we should do that. Like one sector every day at this time for the next 4 years. All right, Nathan, thanks a lot. Nathan Dean, he joins us from Bloomberg Intelligence. He is senior policy analyst on sort of the next steps for the Trump administration and the sectors to watch out for. Bloomberg, I should point out, is in your dashboard with Apple CarPlay. And for listeners in the U.S., here's a reminder. You can listen to us via satellite radio on SiriusXM channel 121. Access the world's only global audio business network, coast to coast, 24 hours a day. Bloomberg Radio on SiriusXM channel 121 is presented by Oracle. Stay tuned for the latest market news and industry research. You have Balance of Power is coming up next, and you're looking at a market that's a little higher on this Tuesday. Yields also a touch lower. Balance of Power is up next after this global newscast.
This is CBS News on the Hour, sponsored by Progressive Insurance.
I'm Steve Kathan. The leaders of two extremist groups are among those who've been freed today in the wake of the Capitol attack pardons issued by President Trump. Oath Keepers founder Stuart Rhodes and former Proud Boys leader Enrique Tarrio were convicted of seditious conspiracy. CBS's Nancy Cordes.
We anticipate that throughout the day today, more of them will be released because they are all now supposed to be going free, their slates wiped clean.
Former Metro police officer Michael Fanone, who lost consciousness and suffered a heart attack after an attacker shocked him with a stun gun during the riot, tells CBS News.
I can assure you that these individuals will go on to commit acts of violence. The American people own this decision.
The Trump administration has ousted the Coast Guard's top admiral, Linda Fagan, who in 2022 became the first woman to lead a branch of the U.S. military. President Trump vowed today on social media to fire more than 1,000 presidential appointees who are, quote, not aligned with our vision. Elise Stefanik, the Trump choice to be U.S. ambassador to the UN, is before a Senate committee considering her nomination.
With hostages, including Americans, still held in Hamas's captivity, to national security challenges ranging from China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran, it has never been more critical for the United States to lead with strength and moral clarity.
Marco Rubio was sworn in today as Secretary of State. The White House is hailing the release of 2 Americans freed in a swap with the Taliban. The deal to release Ryan Corbett and William McKenty was worked out by the Biden administration. Increased winds have been a challenge again for firefighters in the L.A. area, and Mayor Karen Bass warns that stepped-up landslide danger is right around the corner.
We have to prepare for a potential change in weather with the possibility of rain this weekend. So today I'm issuing an executive order to shore up burn areas and stem the flow of toxic debris in the event of rain this weekend.
There's bitter cold from the upper Midwest into the east with below-zero temperatures and wind chills in some places. Snow in the south, as we hear from CBS's Jim Crisula.
Coastal areas from Corpus Christi, Texas, all the way to the Carolinas could see record snowfall. Remarkably, parts of Louisiana are under blizzard warnings. These women were getting ready in chilly Chilton County, Alabama.
We're about to make some soup.
I got to get some hot dogs to go with my chili. I got to get some more milk.
Cold weather advisories extend as far south as central Florida.
And checking Wall Street, right now the Dow is up 427 points. This is CBS News.
reciprocal love.
Trial beginning today with jury selection in L.A. for rapper A$AP Rocky, who's charged with firing a gun at a former friend in Hollywood in 2021. He's pleaded not guilty to 2 felony counts of assault with a semi-automatic firearm. He could get up to 24 years in prison if convicted. A court settlement is reported near as Prince Harry battles media mogul Rupert Murdoch.
Prince Harry accuses the Murdoch-owned Sun tabloid and the now-defunct News of the World of illegal phone hacking and other invasions of his privacy. The publisher has denied those claims while settling more than 1,300 other cases out of court. The Duke of Sussex has already won a similar case against Britain's Daily Mirror and has another one pending against the Daily Mail. Vicky Barker, CBS News.
In a battle of tennis titans, it was Novak Djokovic over Carlos Alcaraz in 4 sets at the Australian Open for a spot in the semifinals. Steve Kathan, CBS News.
From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
And it's only day 2. Welcome to the fastest show in politics, this first full day of President Trump's second term, following a whirlwind first day on the job featuring multiple speeches, dozens of executive actions, more than 1,000 January 6 pardons. Coming up this hour, we'll unpack it all with Bloomberg's Mike Shepard, Douglas Holtz-Eakin from the American Action Forum, and with our signature panel, Bloomberg Politics contributors Jeannie Sheehan Zaino and Rick Davis, back with us for the duration. And it's all after a look at Wall Street, where it smells like animal spirits today. Charlie Pellet has that duty for us in New York. Hey, Charlie.
Absolutely right, Joe Matthews. U.S. stocks are ripping higher right now. Midday trading, we've got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ solidly in the green. Russell 2000 index of small cap shares, speaking of animal spirits, leading us higher, up now by 1.5%. Dow Industrials up by 420. That is a gain of 1%. S&P, to keep it all in context, up 37, up 0.6%. NASDAQ up 61. Choppy session for the composite index, up now by 0.3%. Russell 2000 index, though, bears repeating, up by 1.5%. 10-year at 4.57%, with your 2-year 4.27%. Spot gold is advancing 1.3%, up $36 the ounce, 27.44. West Texas Intermediate crude down 1.9%, 76.41 a barrel. Bitcoin now up 2.3% at just about $104,900 on Bitcoin. Traders are focused on the prospects for economic growth and corporate profits under President Donald Trump. Gary Cohn is vice chairman at IBM. He served as director of the National Economic Council in the first Trump administration.
You know, look, it's day 1 of a 4-year administration. You don't have to put tariffs on day 1. I'm sure there's an enormous amount of debate going on in the White House today, as there was in the transition, on what to do with tariffs, where to put tariffs, where can tariffs be helpful, where can tariffs be hurtful. There are places, I'm sure, where there's pretty universal agreement that we should tariff. There's other places where there's probably divided opinion, and there's places where people think there should not be tariffs.
Gary Cohn, vice chairman at IBM, interviewed this morning from Davos on Bloomberg Radio. On an update for the U.S. market, Apple shares a notable exception. Right now, Apple is down by 4%. Apple lower after getting a pair of analyst downgrades in the latest sign that soft iPhone sales are becoming an increasing concern for investors. Apple now down by 4%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcast. Balance of Power continues. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your host, here he is, Joe Matthew.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you so much. Welcome to the Tuesday edition of Balance of Power. Yes, the markets are back open. Yes, it's the day after Inauguration Day here in Washington, D.C. Kind of still feels the same, though. You can take it from me. Horrible traffic getting into town. Is that all the federal workers afraid they're going to get fired? Got to get in the office. Donald Trump shutting streets down, shuttling around the nation's capital. He's been at the National Cathedral for a bit here, a national prayer service this morning that kicks off his first full day on the job. Live view right now of the POTUS at the National Cathedral. And we'll be following him throughout the day. He's got a couple of things scheduled here, including a very important meeting at the White House that'll get going a little bit after the broadcast on the early edition here of Balance of Power. Is going to sit down with congressional leadership, John Thune, Mike Johnson, Majority Leader and House Speaker. They're talking about, of course, reconciliation and what the first steps are going to be here when it comes to legislating. And then is the threat, at least, of a news conference. We'll see about that around 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time. So that'll walk us into the late edition of Balance of Power here on Bloomberg. It has been newsy already. Before we even get to Donald Trump, we'll update a couple of things quickly on confirmations. The Senate Finance Committee voting to advance Scott Bessent's nomination, so that's off and running. He goes now to the floor. By the way, 16-11, if you're keeping track on your home game. Elise Stefanik in confirmation hearings today. The VA pick Doug Collins, who no one is talking about, up for his confirmation hearing today. And you probably heard by now that Marco Rubio is now the new Secretary of State, having been sworn in now to serve, making him the first member of President Trump's new cabinet to get rolling here. So we've got a lot going on, remembering that we had a lot going on yesterday. If you were with us as part of our special coverage, not only do we cover a swearing in and an inaugural address, we covered a series of other impromptu speeches, a big rally, and the signing of a couple hundred executive orders. Remember?
We're thinking in terms of 25% on Mexico and Canada because they're allowing vast numbers of people. China charges us tariffs, and we charge them very little, except for what I did. I put a lot of, we took in hundreds of billions of dollars. But until I came along, China never paid 10 cents to this country. I'm fine with legal immigration. I like it. We need it because we're going to have a lot of companies coming in to avoid tariffs. We're the only country in the world that does this with birthright, as you know. And it's just absolutely ridiculous. NATO has to pay more money. NATO has to pay 5%. World Health ripped us off. Everybody rips off the United States. And that's it. It's not going to happen anymore.
Just a sampling of his time back in the Oval Office. Salute to Josh Wingrove, by the way, Bloomberg's own Josh Wingrove. If you watch that video, you hear the booming voice of Josh in the Oval Office, and made quite a bit of news here on tariffs because we're not sure exactly what's going to happen on the 1st of February. And that might be a good place to start our conversation with Mike Shepard, back with us now, following his duty on Bloomberg Technology. Great to see you here at the desk, as always. You know, I pull you right into the middle of politics, whether you're talking about it or reporting on it or not. You've seen a number of transitions in your career here in Washington. We've never seen a first day like that.
We really haven't. And Donald Trump said he would start with shock and awe, and sure enough, he did. And it wasn't just the pomp and the circumstance. He got right down to it with all those executive orders that we watched him sign in the evening. There was a gigantic pile. Presidents often will do that. They'll do a number of symbolic gestures and moves on the first day in office, but Trump really made a meal out of it. And you saw that he was holding court with reporters as he was signing those, walking in.
Was that a flashback for you?
A flashback, and it just really took us right back to where we have been, but also where we are going, Joe, because this is going to be the kind of freewheeling approach to governance that he will bring to office once again. And yet, at the same time, they are trying to run a tighter ship. As you noticed, they had someone standing next to them explaining what the orders were. There was a structure to it that we didn't see when he took office back in 2017. So there are some of the similar characteristics of Trump that he'll never be able to shake. But then we're also seeing a few different moves from him in terms of being a little bit more orderly so that we know what's going to happen next.
A new packaging.
Packaging, yes. It's a good way to put it.
But boy, some old-style showbiz for the now once again president. Remember the season finale on The Apprentice when they did the live show, Mike? They rebuilt the whole boardroom on stage. That's kind of what it felt like last night in this rally at the Capitol One Center. He sat down at a desk with a presidential seal to start signing EOs.
Yes, and that, again, is part of his intent to really start out with a bang and to demonstrate that not only am I back, I am really in control. And I am clearing out a lot of the things that I promised to change. He promised quick action on the border. He delivered that. Now, implementation, of course, is another challenge, but at least he has signed the paper and he is going to push his agencies to really try to make good. When you think about immigration enforcement, it happens on the ground, far away from any signing ceremony here in Washington. It requires a lot of people, but he has set that in motion. And then he did some other things too. TikTok. He gave the company.
Last time you were here, we were asking questions. No one knew what was going to happen. Could they go dark? Think of what's happened since then.
Well, although we still have a lot of questions on that, Joe.
Yeah.
One of them is, was the order that he signed actually legal under the law? And we just had, you mentioned Bloomberg Technology, we just had Congressman Jake Okencloss on our show who was questioning whether Trump's order was legal according to the statute that Trump's predecessor, Joe Biden, signed back in April of last year. And that requires the company to show progress toward a deal. This progress actually has to be verified and vetted by the administration and shared with members of Congress. And there actually has to be some paperwork to back it all up. And we've seen not only none of that, we've also seen both ByteDance and the Chinese government really resist any idea of selling TikTok.
Amazing. It sounds like, to your point, we have a lot to learn there, but you can't envision a world in which it goes away, I'm guessing, either. With Donald Trump back in the White House?
It is hard to imagine. And I think right now the real question is, what does Beijing, what do the government officials and leaders there have to say about the latest ideas coming through from Trump, including this idea of a possible joint venture involving the U.S. government, taking some sort of ownership stake? I imagine their heads may be exploding even on at the very thought of that idea. And then the company, this is a key part of its operations. They surely don't want to lose access to that customer base and to all that revenue, setting aside even the national security concerns that we've been hearing about for years here in Washington.
Well, this is your moment, Mike Shepard. Not only the TikTok story, but the titans of tech here in Washington. The true crossover here of technology, policy, and politics landing in your lap. The optics yesterday of these guys, Tim Cook, Mark Zuckerberg, they're Elon Musk, of course, they're standing right there with Donald Trump's future cabinet as if they were part of the cabinet. Elon Musk specifically, he's dancing around the stage literally yesterday. What does it mean for his business and for the others?
The stakes are enormous. And that is in part why you see the industry pivoting toward Trump in such a remarkable way. Let's turn the clock back 4 years. We were coming out of the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol by Trump supporters who were angered that, and couldn't believe that he had lost the election to Joe Biden. That attack on the U.S. Capitol prompted so many companies, but especially the tech industry, to really back away and turn away from Trump. And yet, with the odds growing that he would return to power and return to office, we saw this pivot. It was happening slowly, and then it gained some steam. And of course, when he won the election, Mark Zuckerberg really made a very hard pivot, adding Dana White to the board of Meta, also pulling down some of the content moderation that they had put into place after January 6th. So all of these measures, everything that was old in a way is becoming new again, and the industry is really placing a lot of its chips on Trump.
That's for sure. Chips and coins. Didn't even have time to ask you about Trump coin. We'll do that next time. Mike Shepard, thank you so much, Mike. Loving you on Bloomberg Technology. Thank you, as always, for spending time with us here at the table on Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. I feel like Mark Zuckerberg's hair will be a proxy here of high-tech's relationship with Trump. The longer it gets, right, we know wait till he gets the short hair back. What will they say? Douglas Holtz-Eakin joins us next on the fastest show in politics. Leadership heads to the White House today from the Hill. It's next on Bloomberg.
Coffee. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We have got the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ all advancing. S&P holding close to session highs. S&P right now up 34 at 6,031. That is a gain of 0.6%. Dow Industrials up 402, up 0.9%. NASDAQ up 54, up 0.3%. The outperformer, though, Russell 2000 index of small cap shares surging now by 1.5%. 10-year at 4.57%, with a 2-year currently yielding 4.27%. Spot gold surging $35 the ounce, $27.43. That's a gain of 1.3%. A retreat for West Texas Intermediate crude back with a 76 handle, 76.41 on WTI, down 1.9%. And Bitcoin now up by 3%, 105,570 on Bitcoin. 3M, after earnings, now up by 5%. Among the names reporting after the close of trading today, Netflix. It will be the last report when we hear about Netflix subscribers. Netflix shares ahead of earnings, up by 1.2%. Again, recapping, S&P up 37, up 0.6%. Balance of power continues now in Washington. Back we go once again. Your host, here he is, Joe Matthew.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you so much. The new carpeting in place in the Oval Office, the old golden drapes will stay there. Those were Donald Trump's drapes. Joe Biden never changed them, so they stay. What else happened? They got Andrew Jackson back out there and a couple of other changes of the furniture. This is all part of the transition, of course. Winston Churchill's bust is back in the Oval Office. Be curious to see what it looks like when it's all done. Yeah, producer James reminds the military flags also back in place, lining the room. Joe Biden got rid of those. So imagine the setting today for John Thune and Mike Johnson walking into the Trump White House on the first full day. The strange thing is, we were supposed to have answers to these questions about sequencing, about one beautiful bill or not. Back at the Army-Navy game, remember? They were going to do this over nachos. But we're still today asking the same questions we were following Donald Trump's visit to Capitol Hill. Nobody seems to exactly know quite the way this is going to work out, which makes it a lot more difficult for the people writing the bills. That's why this meeting is very important today. And we like to think, by the way, microphones, the sticks as they call them, they're set up in the driveway of the White House so we hear from those two leaders. Sticks would be the tripods. Wonder what Douglas Holtz-Eakin is thinking about this, because we have huge questions about how we're going to fund the government past March, what we're going to do with the debt ceiling, and how this all comes together with some of the other policy changes that they want to put inside a reconciliation package. He is president of the American Action Forum, former director of the CBO. Oh, just wait till they start scoring this stuff. Douglas Holtz-Eakin, welcome back to Bloomberg. It's great to see you. Well, do you think they emerge with a plan today, at least?
I think that would be wise. I don't think that's been their track record. They've been unable to get on the same page for quite a time now, as you pointed out. It's going to have to come together quickly. I mean, people forget that they don't just get to vote on the one big beautiful bill. They have to write budget resolutions in the House and Senate, pass those that give them the authority to write the one big beautiful bill, get one that can pass the House, one vote margin, get one that can pass the Senate, maybe a few more votes there. And then agree on it and get it to the president's desk. That's a lot of work. And as you mentioned, there are some real speed bumps in between. There's funding the government, there's the debt limit, the Senate has to confirm these nominees. It's going to be very hard to hit the president's 100-day mark. They wanted to do this quickly. There's no evidence that they've got a plan in place that will get it done that quickly.
Yeah. I forgot about the Diet Coke button, Douglas. That's back in the White House, too. Can I get a Diet Coke button in here? Is that? I feel like we could do that at Bloomberg. So with all of that in mind, Mike Johnson says he wants to be voting by the end of February. That's not possible, is it?
Anything's possible, but I'm not optimistic about that timeline. I would be thrilled if they had a plan to govern that had a schedule for votes that everyone had agreed on, House and Senate. I mean, that's what you really need to see. So far, we've heard the majority leader in the Senate saying, I'd love to do 2 bills. The House saying, we want 1 bill. The president saying, I want 1 big, beautiful bill. But if 2 works, that's fine. So getting to a specific date on which to vote, I think the first thing is to decide what you're going to vote on. Let's do that.
So, boy, it just sounds to me then like Donald Trump needs to tell him what to do. Is it a matter of giving direction here, or is it up to the leaders to count the votes and tell him what's going on?
Big changes. 2017 tax bills, this effort require presidential leadership. There is no question that it's very helpful to members of the House and Senate if they can go back home to the town hall and say, look, the president asked me to do this. I don't love everything in this bill. We improved on what he suggested. It's a step in the right direction, but the president asked us to get it done. We're going to get it done. You need that kind of air cover if you're going to make very tough votes in either chamber of Congress.
Right. Okay. I think the CBO needs some air cover, though, Douglas. Based on what I'm reading, there is a thought among the Republican conference that the CBO is not being straight up, that it's not bipartisan, that the scoring is somehow wrong. Are we about to try to reinvent this whole system?
I hope not. I genuinely would defend the CBO's track record of doing nonpartisan, fact-based scoring of the bills. Does that mean they're right all the time? No, of course not. I got things wrong when I was director. Everyone makes mistakes. But the goal for the CBO, the most important thing that Congress can know, is Bill A versus Bill B more or less in the way of deficits. Get them ordered correctly. What's a bigger initiative? What's a smaller initiative? Are you going to be right on the number 10 years from now? No way. That's a bar too high. But let's get the bills ordered correctly so they're voting on the thing they prefer to vote on.
Yeah. Fascinating. You have to not only deal with the scoring of the CBO, you have to get through something called the parliamentarian here, and there are a lot of questions, Douglas, about what gets through the bird bath, as they call it. They're talking about putting a lot of policy into a reconciliation package that's designed for budgeting. How does that work?
So the authors of the 74 Budget Act, which created this reconciliation process, and remember, what reconciliation really does is allow you to bypass the rules of the Senate. You can't filibuster the bill. You have a finite amount of debate. You go and take a vote, simple majority. And so they said, well, if we're going to bypass the rules of the Senate, we want to do it. We don't want to do it on everything under the sun. Let's do it on things that are purely budgetary in nature. So now it becomes the parliamentarian's job to decide if a provision is budgetary in nature or not. And if you go back to the Build Back Better effort under President Biden, the parliamentarian said that raising the minimum wage was not budgetary in nature, and it went out. And so there are a whole bunch of things that
border
I think the voters would love to do.
Budgetary in nature?
Well, there's border policy, there's energy policy, there are all sorts of things that you've heard they'd like to do, and the question is, will the parliamentarian agree that those are budgetary in nature, or are they primarily other policy initiatives? One of the most important things that happened was a week or so ago, quietly, Majority Leader Thune said, we will not fire the parliamentarian. I mean, you have heard this chatter that was, Parliament just says, no, we'll just get another parliamentarian. And he said, no, we're not going to do that. And I thought that was an important line he drew in the sand of the legislative process. They're going to have to adhere to the decisions this parliamentarian makes.
It's a really important moment, the fact that John Thune said it and did that, and I'm glad you mentioned it, Doug, because in a couple of weeks it's going to matter a lot. I haven't mentioned Donald Trump's favorite word in the dictionary, of course, that's tariffs, and boy, the argument over extending tax cuts somewhat hinges upon revenue from tariffs, and we're not clear exactly on where we're going. He wants to study most of them based on what we heard in the Oval Office. He's thinking about pretty significant tariffs against Canada and Mexico. Here's what Donald Trump said in the Oval Office last night.
We're thinking in terms of 25% on Mexico and Canada because they're allowing vast numbers of people. Canada's a very bad abuser also. Vast numbers of people to come in and fentanyl to come in.
So we're thinking, Doug, are you starting to wonder if they ever happen? Is this just a bargaining chip?
So I think the most interesting thing we've seen thus far in the one day of the Trump administration is that the international front, the place where he has made the most waves on the campaign trail and where they leaked immediate action as the way to go and sort of just shock and awe, he then sends out a memo that says, let's study these tariffs and decide if they're a good idea. And we have seen nothing on deportations, one full-time in office, but there really was some real effort to sort of prepare people for the minute he's president, this is going to happen. It hasn't. And so I think that's interesting. If you go back to 17, first he did big regulatory reform, control the growth of the regulatory state. Then he did a big appropriations bill, funded the military in particular, did the tax bill. After that, he picked a trade fight with China, and some would argue it really slowed the economy down. That was my read at the time. It looks like maybe they want to get the pro-growth things in first, and then maybe we'll worry about these more problematic international provisions.
Just as you and I are speaking, headline crosses the terminal. This is from Donald Trump's border czar, Tom Homan. Targeted raids are now happening throughout the U.S. We're going to see images next of workplace raids, correct? What does it mean for the labor market and just the optics around this new administration?
Well, I have worried about this as an economic policy for a while. I mean, you've got the images of raids of workplaces. You know, what does that do for the employer-employee relations, productivity in the workplace? What does it do for hiring? Do people think about changing jobs in the flexible U.S. labor market? Does it get freeze up? This is all unknown territory. And, you know, so we'll see how broad in scope these are. We'll see who they're trying to target. And, you know, the first choice would, of course, be those with criminal records here illegally. I don't think anyone disagrees with that. We don't want illegal immigration. We want legal immigration. But the ramifications go well past the economics to the social fabric, and we'll see how this plays out.
Well, that's for sure. It's happening as we speak now with another headline. Democratic-led states sue Trump over birthright citizenship order. That, of course, was another one of the EOs that the president brought forth in the Oval Office yesterday. Douglas Holtz-Eakin, there's an important meeting today, and I know we can get distracted all day long here together. Donald Trump's back in the White House. We were here to talk about a meeting with John Thune and Mike Johnson. Sure. It sounds to me like you're not expecting the earth to shake there, and they're going to come out in the driveway, maybe not have that much different to say. Am I right?
I expect them to walk out and say, we agreed to work on a plan to get this done. And they're going to have to, if they do reach an agreement, which would be very important, they're first going to go back and sell it to their members, respectively, before they announce the agreement. And so I wouldn't expect anything when they walk out of the Oval Office.
Great to talk to you, as always. That's Douglas Holtz-Eakin, of course, American Action Forum. He's been in Washington for a minute, so think about some of the things we just talked about, particularly what he mentioned about the parliamentarian. It's going to be critically important as we watch all of this stuff move forward in the next couple of months, reminding you that the government runs out of money in the middle of March, and we actually have a lot of work to do. It's the 21st of January. Before you know it, we're in February. Confirmations are going to distract us a lot during that time, but there has to be some legislating, at least some crafting of bills to get the ball rolling here. So yes, we'll have more on this breaking story as a group of Democratic-led states as well as cities launched first court fight against the new administration today to block the president's bid to end automatic citizenship for children born in the U.S. whose parents are in the country unlawfully or on non-permanent visas. We're going to assemble our panel next with a lot more. It's a brand new day in the Oval Office. New carpet, Diet Coke button. They also swapped out the bust of Robert F. Kennedy, according to the Wall Street Journal. New silver eagle figures over the fireplace on the mantle. It's coming together as we speak, and we're going to hear from Donald Trump a little later today. We'll bring it to you live right here on Bloomberg.
1240 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We have got the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ all pushing higher. S&P just about the best level of the day. Right to the numbers here. S&P up 43. Now it's 6,040. That is a gain of 0.7%. The Dow up 455, higher now by 1%. NASDAQ is up 0.5%, but the outperformer, the Russell 2000 index of small cap shares, gaining now by 1.6%. The 10-year 4.57%, with the 2-year 4.28%. Spot gold up $34 the ounce, up 1.2%. The precious metal 27.42. West Texas Intermediate crude down 2.1%, 76.21 a barrel on WTI. Bitcoin now up by 3.1%, 105,704, 105,700 right now on Bitcoin. A survey of the world's top corporate officers points to optimism about global economic growth in 2025. And with that story, here's Bloomberg's Vinny Del Giudice.
The professional services firm PwC surveyed 4,700 business leaders worldwide. More than half of the chief executives questioned see global growth accelerating this year despite trade tensions and White House tariff threats. A key reason, they say their companies are operating more efficiently thanks to AI. Vinny Del Giudice, Bloomberg Radio.
Goldman Sachs is promoting a slate of star executives to run its biggest Wall Street business lines, spotlighting the firm's next generation of leadership. You recall last week the bank reported a surge in profit. Goldman Sachs shares today lower by 0.7%. Again, recapping stocks higher. S&P right now is advancing 0.7%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. The Balance of Power continues right now. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your host, here he is, Joe Matthew.
All right, Charlie Pellet with his hands full with the markets open again today, and great to have you back, Charlie, on the fastest show in politics. It's the day after the inauguration, and we're following Donald Trump. He just left the National Cathedral, what was a national prayer service, to start his second full day, making good on the tradition observed by many presidents over time. And we have had some headlines breaking, of course, following the many executive orders that he signed last evening. It was Sharpie heaven pretty much all day, from the Capitol to the Capital One Arena and to the White House. Tom Homan, the border czar for Donald Trump, saying on CNN a short time ago that workplace raids, targeted raids, I should be exact to use his language, targeted raids have begun across the U.S., knowing that had been promised by Donald Trump, right? Day one. Well, here we are, first full day, I guess. Questions about who is being targeted. These are, of course, undocumented immigrants. Our reporters and others caught up with Donald Trump as he was leaving the cathedral a short time ago. I'm sure you'll hear this and see it soon. He was asked whether the targets are undocumented people that have criminal records as well as those not. He says, what I'm saying is once we find primary targets, if they are with the others, we will arrest them too. We will take them to an ICE office for processing. Host countries send travel documents. They could be in detention a few days, a few weeks. Stand by for more on this. It's obviously something that is critical to the job market, something that both workers and employers in many industries are listening very closely to learn more about. This after the big day. How many speeches did he give? We carried 3 here, I think, right? And one of them was written, of course. Donald Trump in his second inauguration. Listen.
The United States will once again consider itself a growing nation, one that increases our wealth, expands our territory, builds our cities, raises our expectations. Our recent election is a mandate to completely and totally reverse a horrible betrayal and all of these many betrayals that have taken place, and to give the people back their faith, their wealth, their democracy. The golden age of America begins right now.
That was something, huh? The betrayal while Joe Biden was sitting 3 feet away from him. We experienced it all with our signature panel, and they're back with us right now. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano, Bloomberg Politics contributors. She is Democratic analyst and political science professor at Iona University. Rick is partner at Stone Court Capital, Republican strategist. Great to see you both with us here. Terry Haynes is asking, Rick, which Trump will the markets get? We got at least 2 Trumps during the course of our coverage yesterday in Washington. You had scripted Trump, and then you had what seemed to be more like the real Trump when he spoke at Emancipation Hall, and then again in the arena where it was retribution hour. Which is the Trump that America's going to get?
Yeah, I think you have to follow the same prescription that we all got used to for, during his first 4 years in office. And that is, and this is such an overused phrase in the first day of his presidency, the second presidency, is you got to pay attention to what he does, not what he says. So, when you have a scripted event like the inaugural address, that pretty much is an articulation of an administration plan that's been vetted through all his staff, and there's a level of commitment there. When he goes down and has his conversation with his supporters in Emancipation Hall, that's just sort of Donald Trump, and some of that could wind up becoming policy, and some of it that'll be the only day you ever hear about it again. And so you can't really get too excited about the unscripted events. But at least the scripted ones give you an insight as to the thinking of the entire team and something he's claiming to be committed to.
Well, Rick's got the decoder ring, Jeannie. I don't know about you. It did feel a little bit yesterday like, things started in the traditional atmosphere of the inauguration, albeit indoors, which was different. But, we had all the trappings of Washington, and it was a carefully worded speech that he delivered, not terribly enthusiastically. I don't know what he thought of the speech. He said the second one was better. As we heard, he gave himself an A+. But things also got a little bit darker with each of the speeches. By the time we got to the arena last night, he's talking about pardoning January 6 hostages and calling out Joe Biden, and he got the crowd to boo his opponent, Kamala Harris. Which one is the Trump that America is going to get the next 4 years?
I dare say, Joe, I think he'd give himself an A++ on all of his speeches. He may have liked the second one better. And by the way, Joe Matthew, I pulled out my Sharpie for the occasion. It's back 4 years later, but mine is yellow. I think if we do follow, and I agree with Rick, what he does rather than what he says, we are already seeing a disjuncture. We heard, for instance, Vice President J.D. Vance go on TV about a week ago and say when it comes to the J6 convicts that they would be carefully distinguishing between those who had committed acts of violence and those who had not. That is not what happened yesterday. And, a day when we were reminded about the fact that President Trump was the victim of 2 assassination attempts, that he was secured by police officers and security officials from start to finish as he should be. He then went that at night and he signed this order, just releasing, pardoning, or commuting the sentences for people who had been found guilty and had pled guilty of horrific crimes against police officers and security officials in the very Capitol where he had just taken the oath of office. So, we do listen to what he says, but when you watch what he does, there is a disjuncture there. And I think we're going to see that play out. And sometimes it's things that people can all get behind. And other times it is things that most people are not going to abide by. And that is the release of people who have violently attacked law enforcement officials in this country.
Including the leaders of the Proud Boys, former leaders, I guess, the founder of the Oath Keepers. This is something that we'll spend a little bit more time on in our second hour with an authority. Kim Whaley will be with us from the Baltimore School of Law, wrote the book on pardons. And we'll get into this more with Rick and Jeannie. There were a lot of EOs, Rick. We knew they were coming. A lot of them were not surprising, right? Birthright citizenship was a big one yesterday. And it leads us to this headline today when it comes to border security and the idea that targeted raids have already begun. Do you take Tom Homan at his word here? President Trump didn't have much to say outside the cathedral when reporters asked him, are we going to all sit down in the evening news, the late edition of Balance of Power, and look at video from these raids?
Yeah, I would think you'd see something. I mean, local news organizations have been alerted. Homan kind of broadcast the punch a couple of 3 days ago that these raids would be happening this week. And, everything we've learned is, likely in sanctuary cities like Chicago and New York and L.A. San Diego, places where a lot of immigrants are living and working. So it'll be interesting to see how they identify individuals, whether they look for the criminals first, which kind of is the indication you've got from Donald Trump. But I think you will see on the evening news tonight, and through tweets and action on on the web all day long. I wouldn't be surprised if Donald Trump himself doesn't tweet that he's cleaning up these cities with the illegals that he said he was going to do all during the campaign. And again, a very popular campaign promise. A significant majority of the American voters have said they're ready for this. So he's leaning into his popularity right now, and I think this first initiative will probably do nothing to slow him down. Whether there are legal challenges that can be fomented, he'll have a month head start by the time those things kick off, and by then he'll have already made a pretty significant impact based on what we're hearing today.
Immigrants' rights advocates are already filing suit, Jeannie, against the birthright citizenship EO. That is, of course, a guarantee in the Constitution. How do you undo that with an EO, or is this going to be bound up in court for the next 4 years?
It'll absolutely be bound up in court. This, of course, is specified in one of our 3 Civil War amendments, the 14th. The language is very clear. The Supreme Court, the late 1880s, said that if you are born in this country, you are a citizen. It was a 6-2 decision, and the 2 went on very narrow grounds concerning China, in fact. So it's very hard to see right now how you can undo that by an EO. But of course, we're talking about a Supreme Court that Donald Trump has been able to shape to his will to a good extent. So it does depend on what the justices say. But these immigration actions are having real consequences already. You had people at the border who were waiting months, families for their CBP appointment, who had those appointments canceled at 12:01. And Rick is right. The idea of deporting illegals who have committed crimes is very popular. The New York Times last week, 87%. The question is, what happens when those deportations expand beyond people who committed crimes? What happens when it expands to people who were brought here as children, infants, our friends, our neighbors, our coworkers, who are wrapped up in this, or separation of families? Donald Trump, speaking to Meet the Press not that long ago, said he knows how bad this could look. And those pictures that you're talking about that we may start to see, they can be devastating. So I don't think we know how this plays out once they get beyond people accused of crimes.
Donald Trump did find the line at one point in the Oval Office last evening, Rick. He opened the drawer. Did you see this in the Resolute desk? And notice the letter that Joe Biden left for him. Let's bring it back to the Oval Office last night.
Oh. What's in there? Thank you, Peter. It could have been years before we found this. Wow. Thank you.
Can you read that on the outside?
Maybe we should all read it together.
It said 47 on the envelope. That was, of course, the traditional letter left by the last guy, in this case, Joe Biden. Rick, what do you think he wrote?
I could never speculate on what would the contents of that letter be, and I was surprised actually that he didn't just read it aloud. He was on quite a roll last night with this presser in the Oval Office. I mean, as if he hadn't gotten enough press all day long with the myriad of events and celebrations that he attended. But look, I mean, I got email and text after text last night about this presser. Donald Trump, totally in control. Donald Trump dictating the terms of his presidency. Donald Trump owns the country. I mean, a lot of people saw the strength in his presser yesterday by doing these EOs and interfacing with the media. And I think that we have to always remember that there were a lot of people who were upset, with the Biden administration, even many Democrats and independents. And Donald Trump is giving them the theater that they were looking for.
I can't wait to hear what Jeannie thinks was in the letter. We'll do that in hour 2, because Rick and Jeannie stay with us. Our signature panel will be right here. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano inside the envelope. Surely he read that after the reporters left, right? Do you wish he did that publicly? I don't think that would have ended the whole tradition, right? There'd be no more letters. A lot more to follow in hour 2 on this day after the inauguration. Congressman Chuck Fleischmann will join us. As I mentioned, Kim Whaley will be here. We'll spend some time with Laura Davison on Bloomberg.
From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
The raids have begun. Welcome to the fastest show in politics as the Trump administration announces the start of targeted raids on the president's first full day in office, following Donald Trump signing dozens of executive orders on day one. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lines in Washington. We're back here this day after the inaugural. Kaylee, the orders we saw range from climate to energy to the border.
Yeah, and the federal government as well. You could add TikTok to that, January 6th pardons. It was a busy first day in office for President Trump. 26 executive orders signed, 4 presidential memoranda, which essentially have the same legal effect. That is a modern record. And yes, he did seem to be focusing on these kind of big buckets. And of course, he still has today ahead of him as he's getting ready to meet with congressional Republican leadership at the White House. And then this afternoon have an event that was dubbed by the White House press secretary as a massive infrastructure announcement. CBS is now reporting that that is a joint venture for artificial intelligence infrastructure by OpenAI, SoftBank, and Oracle.
You see Oracle stock likes the news, up over $9 or 6% right now. This is something that, again, brings us to the intersection of politics and finance and the markets, with headlines from Washington driving Wall Street.
And it's incredible to consider this also comes after Trump yesterday rescinded Biden's sweeping artificial intelligence executive order that was dictating kind of safety and transparency rules for AI. That was just one of 78 Biden executive actions that were rescinded by Trump yesterday.
We're going to pick through a lot. We have a lot to unpack still yesterday. And some of these EOs, by the way, have already drawn court challenges, particularly birthplace citizenship. But we also have Tom Homan, the border czar, telling CNN today that targeted workplace raids have begun, of course, going after undocumented workers, at least criminal offenders. And we're hoping to learn more about that for you while we're on the air today.
And we'll, of course, have the latest details. We'll also bring you a conversation live from Capitol Hill with Republican Congressman Chuck Fleischmann of Tennessee. But first, we begin, as always, with a check on the markets. And Charlie Pellet has a look from New York. Hey, Charlie.
Thank you very much. And here's what's going on. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, all advancing. Lots of green on the screen. Back to work Tuesday. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, all advancing. Best level of the day right now on the S&P. The standout, though, the Russell 2000 index of small cap shares surging 1.7%. To put that in context, S&P right now up 0.8%. We got the S&P up 48 at 6,045. The Dow up 1%. NASDAQ up 0.7%. Again, the Russell 2000 index of small cap shares worth repeating up 1.7%. 10-year 4.58%. The 2-year 4.29%. Gold now up $32 the ounce, $27.40, up 1.2%. West Texas Intermediate crude now slumping 2.4%, $76.05 a barrel, and Bitcoin up 3.5%. Bitcoin $106,100 on Bitcoin. And again, repeating our top story, President Trump will be announcing billions of dollars in private sector investment to build AI infrastructure in the U.S. in a joint venture by OpenAI, SoftBank, and Oracle. It'll be called Stargate. This, according to CBS News. Oracle shares up now by 5.7%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. Balance of Power continues. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your hosts, Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lyons.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you so much. Here in Washington, we are all just braced to see what's going to happen next after what has already been a whirlwind 24 hours, I guess 25 hours now since Donald Trump took the oath of office and officially became the 47th president of the United States. And I did not know one person could do so much in such a short period of time with what Trump described yesterday as the mandate he was given by the American electorate with his decisive victory, reshaping the federal government and many policies as we know them, be it from energy to the border.
It was interesting to watch these EOs roll out at various venues at different times throughout the day, starting right at the Capitol moments after the inaugural address in his speech to the Emancipation Hall. But then we were doing more at the Capital One Center. It looked like the finale of The Apprentice when they rebuilt the boardroom on the stage. They had the desk out there, the presidential seal, but it really came together in the Oval Office last evening. Bloomberg's Josh Wingrove had quite a time talking with Donald Trump as he was actually signing the paperwork.
Yeah, the signing ceremony turned into a press conference, actually. Here's a little taste of what went down.
We're thinking in terms of 25% on Mexico and Canada because they're allowing vast numbers of people. China charges us tariffs, and we charge them very little, except for what I did. I put a lot of, we took in hundreds of billions of dollars. But until I came along, China never paid 10 cents to this country. I'm fine with legal immigration. I like it. We need it because we're going to have a lot of companies coming in to avoid tariffs. We're the only country in the world that does this with birthright, as you know. And it's just absolutely ridiculous. NATO has to pay more money. NATO has to pay 5%. World Health ripped us off. Everybody rips off the United States. And that's it. It's not going to happen anymore.
And that was just day one. Joining us now, Bloomberg's Laura Davison, who drives our political coverage here in our Washington bureau. I don't even know where to start with you on this, so I guess we'll start broadly here. This was clearly a new tone, a new posture for the White House in the attempt to expand executive power.
Yes, I mean, really, the goal that the administration went in with was shock and awe, and I think they successfully achieved that. There was a whole bevy of executive orders, ranging from everything from sort of more messaging things around, like inflation, directing departments to cut inflation. Not sure how that's going to work. To a lot of things that'll have wide-ranging impact, on the energy front, on curbing a lot of regulations there. We're already seeing some legal action in response to some of these orders, particularly on the birthright citizenship front. So there's a whole sort of day two sort of spawning, and Washington is sort of spinning as they try to figure out exactly how to tackle all these bits and pieces. We also just heard that the SEC is starting a crypto task force to get a whole regulatory framework there. So everyone is moving at 100 miles an hour, and all these things are happening all at once.
Well, we thought he might be moving at 100 miles an hour when it comes to enacting tariffs as well, and it seems like maybe we're only moving at like 15 miles an hour, because clearly he talked about it yesterday. He outlined February 1st as potentially the deadline by which we could see the tariffs enacted on Mexico and Canada, but nothing sweeping announced on day one, despite it being his favorite word in the dictionary, as he reiterated yesterday.
This is, I think where you really see Trump thinking about tariffs as a negotiating tool coming into play. Instead of, imposing a big thing on day one, he's teasing them, he's keeping everyone on their toes. So you see global leaders reacting, you see markets reacting, you see traders reacting, trying to figure out, okay, what's happening? And it also gives them an opportunity to go to Trump and say, oh, could we offer this? Could we cut a deal? Could we do that? And that's what he wants, ultimately. He is going to impose some tariffs. We don't know what those are going to be. We don't know what that's going to look like. But he's probably not going to do everything that he talked about. So what everyone's trying to figure out right now are which are the ones he's serious about, which are the ones that he might be able to flex on. And that those Canadian tariffs, Mexican tariffs, that 25% that he talked about in the press conference last night, those are ones that he suggested he might be willing to back down on, if he gets what he wants in terms of the flow of illegal drugs and undocumented migrants.
Boy, there's a lot there. As we just said, AI, to Kaylee's point earlier, will be a big feature this afternoon. He's going to be talking about implementing this big AI infrastructure, investments into OpenAI and Oracle. How much of that has to do with the tech bros who were such a big part of the optics on Inauguration Day?
It has a lot to do with that. You see just a total 180 shift in how the tech world is embracing Trump this time around. They have gotten close to him. They are there. And Trump loves nothing more than someone who was previously critical, who has now come and sort of acts as a supplicant. So what we're going to see today is sort of what Trump has done over the past couple weeks at press conferences, kind of announcing, bringing out business leaders and saying, look, because of me, because of my policies, here's the kind of business investment we're going to get. What's still not clear yet is, it's sort of this announcement will include billions of dollars of AI infrastructure from OpenAI, Oracle, some other companies. But how much of this is new money that hasn't yet been committed versus sort of a repackaging of other projects that have already been announced? As you see, we've seen in the past, and we'll probably see in the future, business leaders sort of coming to Trump saying, oh, we're going to do this all because of you, trying to curry favor, but it's not really a new investment. It's just something that they were already going to do, and they just sort of pivot the framing of it.
All right, well, we'll see how it is framed late this afternoon at the White House. Bloomberg's Laura Davison, politics editor for us. Thank you so much. And of course, before we get that massive infrastructure announcement, as they're describing it at the White House, there's some meetings that need to take place at the White House first, specifically with Republican congressional leadership. First, Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, and the Senate Majority Leader John Thune will meet with the president, and then wider Republican leadership. It's all about the legislative path forward and how exactly it is going to get done, considering what Donald Trump himself described yesterday in his remarks at Emancipation Hall as an incredibly narrow majority in the House of Representatives.
Congratulate Mike Johnson for the job that he's doing. Steve, we gave him a majority of almost nothing. And then I said, to make it tougher on him, let me take 2 or 3 of the people, right? I said, he'll only have to suffer with that for about 3 months. How are they doing, by the way? Is that moving along?
So there you have it, saying the quiet part out loud.
Yeah, good luck with that.
Yeah.
Could be a majority of 1 if things go as planned.
Yeah, so let's go to one member of that majority. Joining us live now from Capitol Hill here on Bloomberg TV and radio is Congressman Chuck Fleischmann, Republican representing Tennessee's 3rd District. Welcome back to Balance of Power, Congressman, as we await the readout, if you will, from the meeting the Speaker and John Thune will have with the President today, it's really going to be about the way in which a reconciliation package can move forward. We know the Speaker thinks it has to be one big bill, but are there right now 218 votes in the House for one big bill?
It's yet to be seen. We've had very furtive meetings, probably about 4 or 5 meetings in the House Republican caucus to discuss this. One bill or two. The president wants one bill. I think the vast majority of members in the House will accede and agree to that as one bill, but we're going to have to do a count. You're absolutely right. We will have a one-vote majority in the House, provided everyone shows up on both sides, until April, when the 2 Florida seats will be filled. They'll be filled by Republicans. Ultimately, we'll have about a 4-seat majority. But it's going to be difficult. It's a process. I applaud the president and the House and Senate leaders for discussing reconciliation, what will be in, what will be out, what we can do and what we can't do. I'm an appropriator. We have appropriations to get done. That cannot be done through reconciliation. So actually refining and defining the process is critically important, and making sure that we meet and move forward. So can we get it done? Yes. I applaud all of our leadership and President Trump for being very methodical in the way he's gone about this. We're laying everything out, transparency for everybody in both parties, and more importantly for the American people.
Well, that said, Congressman, and it's good to have you back in Washington and with us here on Bloomberg. What does that mean when you look at the calendar? What's realistic? Mike Johnson says he wants votes by the end of February, but you just invoked regular order. If we're going to actually go through the real budgeting process and handle reconciliation separately, manage the debt ceiling, is that realistic?
Well, it's yet to be seen whether or not the debt ceiling will be part of reconciliation. Under the terms of reconciliation, if we do debt ceiling that way, we will be obligated by law to pick a specific number. Some members will have an aversion towards that. Some of our more conservative members might not want to put a number on that. I don't know where the president stands on that, but these are ongoing investigations. Again, if it's one big bill, what will be in, what will be out? There'll be certain things that will be less palatable to some of the members that may not get in the big bill. So we're just going to have to wait and see what we can get the 218 with, where the votes are. And the best part about it is we go through a very specific whipping process. By that I mean every member will be asked where they're going to be on reconciliation and why and what their thoughts are. If they are in a no position, what can we do to get them to yes? What do they want in or out of the bill? So we do have time. It is a shortened field, but we are being very careful and very thoughtful. Again, we've had 3 or 4 meetings already on this. All have been very furtive, all have been productive, and we're listening to our membership from top to bottom.
Well, and of course, this is all what the executive branch and legislative branch will be working on together. But as Joe and I were describing, I'm sure you heard, Congressman, Donald Trump has taken a lot of action already through the power of the executive, including announcing what he calls a national energy emergency, as outlined in his inaugural address yesterday. Let's listen.
The inflation crisis was caused by massive overspending and escalating energy prices, and that is why today I will also declare a national energy emergency. We will drill, baby, drill.
Congressman, is drill, baby, drill enough to get not just energy prices, but prices across the board down? And what role do other forms of energy, like wind, for example, which the president also issued orders pulling back on yesterday, play in this?
I'm glad you asked me this question because this is my wheelhouse. I chair the Energy and Water Subcommittee of Appropriations. So I fund the Department of Energy, all of the energy initiatives. I chair 8 congressional caucuses dealing with energy. I just launched the American Dominance in Energy Caucus with Democrats and Republicans. To answer this question, drill, baby, drill is a great start. We need to utilize our oil, our gas, our abundant fossil fuels. I am a champion of nuclear. I'm the nuclear congressperson in either house. I work with people across the aisle. We need new nuclear. We need geothermal. We need abundant energy in America. If we do not act, and I applaud President Trump for being so aggressive on energy, and there is an energy emergency because we're going to need energy to propel AI. We're going to need energy to propel our great manufacturing boom in this country. We want to make absolutely certain that we have abundant energy. It will be oil, it will be gas, it will be nuclear, geothermal, solar will have a place. So we want to make sure we have abundant energy, but it's got to be common sense abundant energy.
Well, we've established the need, Congressman, and we've talked about this with you more than once here on Bloomberg TV and radio. You look at stocks like Constellation taking off here. We know the demand is there. We also know that the red tape is there. What did Donald Trump do in those executive orders yesterday that will actually lead to a new nuclear power plant in this country?
Well, actually, fortunately, if you look at the fiscal 2025 budget, which I wrote for the energy and water bill in the House, it proposes close to $9 billion in new funding for new nuclear. In terms of executive orders, he's going to make it easier for all energy companies to do business. But as we focus somewhat in a parochial sense on nuclear, we've got to be wise about it. There's a lot of designs out there. There's a lot of different fuel systems, Generation 3, Generation 4. We've got to choose wisely. I've already spoken with Secretary Wright, incoming Secretary Wright. He has yet to be confirmed. He and I have spoken. Secretary Burgum and I have spoken. We are going to work together to make sure that it's economically feasible. But the key is going to be, yesterday, I believe President Trump named the new Nuclear Regulatory Commission chair. That is going to be very important. Why? The Nuclear Regulatory Commission is important for safe nuclear. Nuclear is safe, but they need to move in a more swift fashion. They're too slow. They're too lethargic. We have got to get going. Why? Russia, China, even our friends, the French and the South Koreans and the Canadians, are moving ahead of us. If we focus, and I know one thing about President Trump, he will focus on getting it done right. New nuclear will boom in America.
Congressman, just quickly before we let you go, we only have about 45 seconds here, but on January 6, 2021, you called it a sad day and condemned the actions that took place. Do you have a reaction, sir, to the pardon of the more than 1,500 people who were convicted of crimes on that day?
Well, as a member of the legislative branch, I had been on the House floor that day, was subject to a bomb threat in my office where my whole staff had to leave. That does not get talked about a lot. But the reality is, I'm going to defer to President Trump on the pardons. That is something of the executive branch. I'm in the legislative branch. As a constitutionalist, I will defer to President Trump and his judgment.
All right.
He had a great first day. I hope he has a great 4 years, and I'm here to help him.
Congressman, we appreciate your coming back. This is Chuck Fleischman, Republican from Tennessee's 3rd District. We're going to have a lot more on those January 6 pardons coming up. Our signature panel is on the way next. This is Bloomberg.
It's 121 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Stocks are pushing higher. Our top story at this hour, President Trump will be announcing billions of dollars in private sector investment to build artificial intelligence infrastructure in the U.S. in a joint venture with OpenAI, SoftBank, and Oracle to be called Stargate. This according to CBS News, citing people familiar. Right now we have got Oracle trading higher. Oracle shares up now by 6.1%. And at 4 o'clock New York time, President Trump will be holding a news conference. We'll have it for you live on Bloomberg. S&P up 51 again, up by 0.9%. The Dow up 473, up 1.1%. And NASDAQ up 143, up by 0.7%. The Russell 2000 index of small cap shares, the outperformer, advancing now by almost 1.8%. 10-year, 4.57%. The 2-year, 4.28%. Spot gold up $36 the ounce, up 1.3%. West Texas Intermediate crude just above $76 a barrel, down 2.3%. And Bitcoin up 3.8%, 106,360 now on Bitcoin. Again, recapping, S&P up 51, a gain of 0.9%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. Balance of Power continues. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your hosts, Joe Matthew and Kaylee Limes.
All right, Charlie Pellet in New York, thank you so much. I'm Kaylee Limes alongside Joe Matthew here in Washington, where, of course, it's the first full day of the second Trump administration. The president began his day today with, as is tradition, prayer service at the National Cathedral. He's now back at the White House, where just about 30 minutes from now, he's scheduled to meet with Republican congressional leadership. Both the House Speaker, Mike Johnson, and Senate Majority Leader John Thune will be arriving to discuss the legislative agenda. And while, Joe, we often frame this as just the path forward on budget reconciliation, we do have to keep in mind there's a government that needs to be funded beyond the deadline of March 14th, the debt ceiling that is going to need to be raised at some point, and a very tight majority in the House you're working with to get it all done.
That's true. With a live view of the West Wing, the entrance that will at some point carry the congressional leadership toward the Oval Office, they'll likely emerge. Microphones and cameras are set up in the driveway to maybe get a sense of what it was like in the room, because you're right, Kaylee, we don't have a way forward on any of these items, despite the fact they've been talking about it for weeks. Still don't know if it's one big, beautiful bill. Go back to the Army-Navy game. It was supposed to be hashed out weeks and weeks ago, and we're still not there yet.
And I'm just going to add something else to this list. You still have to get the rest of Trump's cabinet confirmed at some point, too, in a Senate that sometimes can be arduous in its processes to get everything done. Marco Rubio, the first to be sworn in today.
Yeah, that's right. Scott Bessent, by the way, cleared committee. We should let our audience know the likely incoming Treasury Secretary now goes to the floor, where he also is expected to be confirmed. But yes, Marco Rubio becomes the first. We'll have a lot more coming up with our signature panel here. We want to bring in Rick and Jeannie?
Sure.
Bloomberg Politics contributors. Of course, they were with us on Inauguration Day. Democratic analyst Jeannie Shanzano, of course, and Republican strategist Rick Davis, partner at Stone Court Capital. A lot more to talk about here as we get ready for this meeting. Jeannie, what's going to happen inside the Oval today? Will they craft a plan?
I don't know if they'll craft a plan, but they certainly have a lot to talk about. I think one of the things we forget is that Donald Trump's first term, he did not have an enormous number of legislative victories. Certainly the 2017 tax bill was a big one for him. But beyond that, legislative victories were few and far between. I mean, I think we all remember there was a running joke during his term and terms before his that every week was infrastructure week, but nobody could pass the bill. And so what he set out for himself in terms of the legislation he wants to get passed in Congress, it is a huge, big, looming set of priorities he had. And that, you just went through some of them, and that's what they're going to be discussing. And it's not just on reconciliation, one or two bills. It's what the heck is that bill going to have in it? What are his must-haves, for instance? And I think the debt ceiling is going to be the thing that frustrates him the most. And of course, you've got a narrow majority in the House. So there's a lot for them to discuss in there today. And it's stuff that Donald Trump probably doesn't love about his job, which is the nitty-gritty of legislation.
And yet it's the job that he has as of 25 hours or so ago, Rick. He's going to have to work with Congress on this stuff, obviously. And Congress is going to have to figure out how to work together. How much of this meeting do you expect could actually be Trump and Johnson, who seem to be on the same page with reconciliation, trying to convince Thune to get vocally on board?
Yeah, look, I mean, this isn't the first meeting they've had, and I think they've sort of found each other's priorities. A lot of it's going to be now really up to Donald Trump. I mean, you know, we know Thune is pushing a 2-bill reconciliation package, one in the spring, one in the winter or fall of next year, around the end of the fiscal year at the end of September. And so we know that Johnson's going to do whatever Donald Trump wants to do, right? I mean, I think it's unfair to actually say that Johnson has a point of view. Johnson echoes the point of view of the president. And so this is totally up to Donald Trump. He's going to make the call, and I think he's going to make it today. I don't think they want to delay action. I mean, you know, getting something done by March 15th is not going to be easy, and they're running up against all these deadlines like the continuing resolution. I mean, the debt limit deadline has passed tomorrow. It's, you know, or it passed on the 2nd of January. So we're working off of extraordinary measures now that'll maybe get us into the spring or summer. So like these are things piling up, and as Congressman Fleischman said, they've got all this other stuff, these confirmations to do, regular order around appropriations and authorizations. It's going to be a capacity problem if they think they can do it all in one bill. So I think Thune will come out with a victory, but I think there's going to be some definition to it today, because after the Thune-Johnson meeting, they bring in the leadership of both the House and the Senate, and I assume that's to get the marching orders.
Well, it would help to get some direction today, and we'll keep tabs on what we hear. That meeting is set to begin just over a half hour from now at the White House. We have the matter of January 6 pardons to discuss. Donald Trump danced around this throughout the day yesterday. He talked about the fact that pardons were coming. We didn't know until late yesterday inside the Oval Office what we would get. Here's Donald Trump from earlier in the day.
Tonight, I'm going to be signing on the J6 hostages, pardons, to get them out. And as soon as I leave, I'm going to the Oval Office and we'll be signing pardons for a lot of people, a lot of people.
And it was a lot of people, about 1,500, including violent offenders who attacked the Capitol and attacked police officers on January 6th. Full, complete, and unconditional pardons, including the likes of Enrique Tarrio, the former national leader of the Proud Boys, walking free today. His mother was tweeting about it last night. Now, Jeannie, if you look at the video that we just showed, Donald Trump was standing in front of family members of hostages who were taken in Gaza, including an actual freed hostage who was there on the stage last night. They were presumably brought up on the stage to show respect and tribute to their family members. There they are again with the yellow scarves on. And Donald Trump turned to the podium and started talking about January 6th offenders as hostages, received quite a bit of applause. Was that the proper way to roll this out, Jeannie Shanzano?
I don't think there is a proper way to roll this out. I think we have a president now who fulfilled his promise of, you know, pardoning these folks. But he did this on the heels of an inauguration where he promised to restore law and order. And what did he do? Hours later, after being, kept safe all day and for the campaign trail by security, he went in and pardoned people who are convicted of the most violent crimes against police officers in our country. And I don't know how you square that. It's an attempt to whitewash history. And what it has left in people's minds, and your point about the hostages is absolutely important. It has left the idea that he's wanting to support police officers and ensure that anybody who commits violence against them is held responsible, unless the police officers are doing something that he doesn't like. And that is a problem. So I don't know if there's a good way to do this. And let's not forget that QAnon shaman, who was released as well, or at his sentence out of jail, He went on social media last night and applauded the fact that he's been pardoned and he can go out and buy some guns now. So that's what the president does, which is why there's no right way to do this. And he chose the wrong way in pardoning all of these people in a blanket pardon, regardless of their crimes or their charges.
But Rick, on the other hand, isn't this exactly what he has long said he would do should anyone be surprised by him actually taking this action?
Well, this is actually one where, it's a classic example of almost reverse, right? Where you say, don't listen to what he says, see what he does. And usually what he does is less impactful than what he says. In this case, throughout the campaign, he kept it kind of general as to whether he would pardon the violent offenders. 379 of the 1,500 that he pardoned had attacked police and caused damage to the Capitol. And that wasn't a very politically favorable thing to do. So he kind of left it open. And even as vice president, went out as early as just a few weeks ago, did an interview saying, no, we wouldn't give those guys a break. Anybody who attacks a cop should serve time. And so it's pretty clear that what his intention was much worse than what he was willing to say. This was one where even members of Congress were caught by surprise, thinking, well, wait a minute, I thought he was saying that he was only going to do the nonviolent misdemeanors and people like that. So I got to tell you, I think this was a inside job. Those folks around Donald Trump, who had relationships with the Proud Boys and the folks who did organized the attack, obviously weighed in on his interests. And I'm not sure it was even widely vetted within the staff who were in the process of preparing all these documents, because this was one where what he did was different than what he said.
Well, yeah, interesting. The group Protect Democracy put a list together of lawmakers' comments. J.D. Vance as well, to your point, Rick, who said, if you committed violence on that day, obviously you should not be pardoned. Senator Katie Britt said, I agree with J.D. Senator Josh Hawley, Republican, of course, I'm against it for people who assaulted cops, threw stuff at cops, broke down doors, broke windows. Jeannie, there's an equivalency thing here going on, too. Of course, Joe Biden was roundly criticized, I think by including you as well, for pardoning members of his family on his way out the door yesterday. In our remaining moment, why do you not see those in the same light?
Pardoning members of your family, as you mentioned, I am not a fan of that, nor am I a fan of preemptive pardons, but that is highly different than pardoning people who attacked violently police officers in our nation's capital. And Senator Tom Tillis, a Republican, was right when he said it makes the Capitol less safe, and you can't have it both ways. We all have to condemn violence wherever we find it. Donald Trump is now saying some violence is forgivable and okay when it's in my interest, and other violence I'm not accepting. And that is a problem for all of us, and it should be condemned.
All right, Jeannie Shanzano and Rick Davis, Bloomberg Politics contributors, our signature political panel. Thank you for joining us. And of course, we're going to have more on pardons still ahead with Kim Whaley. She's professor at the University of Baltimore School of Law and an expert on pardons. That's still ahead here on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
It's 1:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We have got the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ all advancing just about the best level of the day on the S&P right now, up 51 at 6,048. That is a gain on the S&P of almost 0.9%. Dow Industrials up 448, up by 1%. NASDAQ up 148. That is a gain now of 0.8%. 10-year 4.56%. The 2-year 4.27%. Gold up $37 the ounce, up 1.4%. West Texas Intermediate crude down 2.3%. And Bitcoin up 4.6%, now at 107,200 on Bitcoin. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. Balance of Power continues. Back we go to Washington. Once again, Joe Matthew and Haley Lyons.
All right, Charlie, great to have you back today. Charlie Pellet at World Headquarters in New York, watching Wall Street for us here on the fastest show in politics. You wonder who will do the first Enrique Tarrio interview? Who will do the Stuart Rhodes sit down? Will there be soft seating? They've been pardoned by Donald Trump, of course, among the most violent January 6 offenders. Enrique Tarrio, the former leader of the Proud Boys, Stuart Rhodes, the Oath Keepers, Ryan Samsel, the first rioter to breach police lines, Guy Reffitt, who carried a firearm during a standoff with police to help to lead the way to the Capitol. Pardoned, among 1,500 pardoned by Donald Trump in a series of pardons and commutations. It's pardon fever in Washington. You heard about Joe Biden naming family members on the way out the door. Here's Donald Trump on the way in.
First, we have a list of pardons and commutations relating to events that occurred on January 6, 2021.
Okay, and how many people is this?
I think this order will apply to approximately 1,500 people, sir.
So this is January 6th. These are the hostages. Approximately 1,500 for a pardon.
Yes.
Full pardon.
Of course, what he's referring to as hostages in most instances were people who had been convicted of crimes committed on that day, many of whom pleaded guilty to those crimes. So for more on this now, we want to turn to a pardon expert. Kim Whaley is with us. She's professor at the University of Baltimore School of Law. She's also author of the book Pardon Power, How the Pardon System Works and Why. Kim, thanks for coming back to Balance of Power. Would you describe this mass pardon of nearly 1,500 offenders from January 6, 2021 as the pardon system working?
No, I would not. Even Justice Department guidelines, which are not binding on presidents, one of the criteria is whether the person seeking a pardon could be violent. And so it's antithetical to the idea behind a pardon and amnesty pardons in particular. They go all the way back to George Washington and the Whiskey Rebellion, through the Civil War. Abraham Lincoln and Andrew Johnson pardoned Confederate soldiers, and then Jimmy Carter pardoned draft dodgers after the Vietnam War. Mass pardons traditionally are about healing the country, moving the country forward after a tragedy under some blanket notion of Americans. And here this is undermining the legitimacy of the rule of law. And of course, Donald Trump himself was both impeached and indicted for his role in January 6th. So he's really standing in solidarity with people who tried to overthrow the peaceful transfer of power and our constitutional structure itself.
Well, so then what happens if some of these individuals, let's say Enrique Tarrio, goes on to, he's convicted of seditious conspiracy, right? I'm trying to get a sense of the precedent here. What happens if they get in trouble again? Would there be a record to look back on?
So a pardon does not actually wipe out your entire criminal record. That requires an exoneration by a judge, but it does more than a commutation. A commutation just changes your sentence. If you're in prison, you get released. If you're on death row, you might get life in prison, for example. But a pardon does lift some of the strictures on a felony conviction. So you might have broader access to guns. You might be able to travel to parts of the world that without a pardon that would be restricted. You would have access to different kinds of government benefits, et cetera. So it does give back some privileges, voting rights in certain states that a pure basic commutation would not do.
Well, and it wasn't just about pardons and commutations yesterday. Kim, Trump also, through this action, ordered the Attorney General to seek the dismissal of the roughly 450 cases that are pending before judges, people who have been charged but not yet convicted or acquitted. Is there any guarantee that the dismissal for all of those cases happens? Is that up to the DOJ or up to the judges who have those cases before them?
Well, judges actually do have some discretion to decline to have a case dismissed under the federal rules of criminal procedure, but I can't imagine any judges would push back on that because there wouldn't be anyone to actually move forward and prosecute those cases. Definitely Pam Bondi made clear during her confirmation hearings that she's in lockstep with this president, which of course is a different precedent than we've seen since Watergate, where the Justice Department has been very careful to be independent of the president so that there aren't conflicts of interest. Donald Trump ran on using the Justice Department as an arm of his own retribution. So we're in a different world right now. I think the judges are going to be thoughtful about that, you know, and seeing new prosecutions and be mindful of vindictive prosecutions. But there really isn't a lot judges can do if the DOJ wants to go forward on certain things.
We're hearing from some of our viewers and listeners here throughout the day about the equivalency argument and how one can criticize Donald Trump for what he did after Joe Biden pardoned Hunter Biden. And then yesterday, other members of his family issued preemptive pardons for members of the January 6th committee and others. How would you answer them?
There's a lot of confusion around pardons. You know, the Donald Trump pardons, again, greenlighting political violence. There was a survey done over the summer, bipartisan support. Republicans, Democrats did not want to see this because it basically creates a street army that thinks they're above the law. If you want to peacefully protest in Washington, people are going to now feel emboldened, so long as it's in the name of Donald Trump, to come out violently. That's not, I think, how we want our children to be walking around the streets of America. You know, I was not critical of the Hunter Biden pardon. In part, that's different because than the family pardons this week, because he went through years of criminal investigation, both under Trump and under Biden, and they came up with some pretty low-level charges. And I think his dad was worried about real retribution, given that they've raked him over the coals with that fact pattern already. These family pardons that are really nebulous, you know, James Biden did have some issues with his congressional testimony and a referral to DOJ for alleged perjury. But, you know, the wives, the other siblings, this really seems like nepotism taking care of his own. And it does set a bad precedent. And I'll tell you what the precedent is. It is, listen, now with the immunity ruling, Donald Trump and future presidents will have, knowing they can commit crimes all they want, they're going to need to get people to go along with that to execute those criminal orders. I think the Joe Biden pardons of his family sort of sets a precedent for just open pardons, open season on pardons, really vague, to immunize deputy co-conspirators. So you take immunity, you add the pardon. We have a crime gang in the White House, and the Supreme Court basically amended the Constitution to say there's not much that we can do about it unless we, the people, get together and actually amend the Constitution, which is not an easy task.
Oh, it certainly is not. So when we consider, and you were speaking to this earlier, what comes with a pardon, were the members of the Biden family who have been kind of blanket pardoned by him now basically be untouchable if they were called to testify before Congress, for example, which there have been some signal Republican lawmakers still do intend to do? Is there any way to still get at them despite the action the president took yesterday?
Yeah, so the pardon started in 2014 to current time period. So in theory, any activity prior to 2014 would not be covered. But, you know, the Constitution says it applies to federal offenses. It's been traditionally perceived to be criminal offenses. It hasn't technically been extended to civil. I don't think there's anything standing in the way of arguing that a pardon would somehow give some immunity to Congress, but there's congressional testimony, but there's no legal authority for that. It wouldn't protect from an IRS investigation. I think there would be litigation around refusing to testify. Of course, a pardon, if accepted, basically means you cannot invoke the right to against self-incrimination under the Fifth Amendment. So I think they could probably object to certain questions depending on what the context was. But if they fall within the pardon, there'd be an argument they would have to answer them or be held in contempt of Congress, which we saw when Donald Trump's witnesses refused to testify before the January 6th committee. That's also very hard to enforce.
Yeah. Kim, you've been great on this. We learned a lot from Kim Whaley, who truly wrote the book on pardons. It's called Pardon Power, How the Pardon System Works and Why. She's professor at University of Baltimore School of Law. With us here on Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons. We're counting down now, about 10 minutes away, at least the scheduled start of an important meeting at the White House with congressional leadership and the President of the United States. They're going to be talking about the congressional agenda, specifically when it comes to budgeting, reconciliation, and what will be the order of events, whether it's in one big bill or not. No, we haven't figured that out yet. And with us now, our appropriations expert, Jack Fitzpatrick at Bloomberg Government, is with us live from Capitol Hill. Jack, do we get a roadmap today?
We should get into some more specifics because now we're finally moving past some of the pomp and circumstance and champagne bottles being uncorked and into the difficult discussions in which House and Senate Republicans try to get the president, not the president-elect anymore, but the president on their side in terms of specific strategy. Having said that, there's been weeks, if not a couple months of discussions about, do we do one big bill or two bills? Do we get into the